My name is Councillor Martin Todd, Chairperson of the Cabinet and Leader of the Council. This meeting is live streamed from the Council's YouTube channel, and the recording will also be available after the meeting. Subtitles can be switched on, and advice on how to turn these on is set out online. Can everyone ensure mobile phones are on silent, and can I remind members to use their microphones? In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Can I welcome members of the public to this meeting this morning? We will invite you forward when it is time to make your contribution. Turning to the agenda, the first item is apologies for absence, and I have apologies from Councillor Becker. The second one is membership of Cabinet committees, and we have no changes to announce today. The third one is disclosures of interest. I need to declare that I have a disclosable pecuniary interest in respect of the items on the agenda due to my additional roles as Hampshire County Councillor. However, as there is no material conflict of interest regarding these items, I have a dispensation granted by the Audit and Governance Committee that enables me to speak and vote on these matters. Councillor Porter.
I would like to declare the same interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other interests for declaration? No. I have 4 councillors have requested to speak today. Councillor Cromoyson will speak on a general item, Councillor Lee on items 8 to 13, Councillor Horrell on items 8, 9 and 11, Councillor Godfrey on items 8 and 10. The next item of business is the public participation. I have a request from Councillor David Tozer from Littleton and Harestock Parish Council to speak on the Sir John Moore Barracks paper, and I will ask you to come forward when we get to that point. And we also, I think, have here today Ian Woodward, Nikki Davis and Rob Gardner, who will be available to speak potentially on the Sir John Moore report as well, if necessary. So since Councillor Cromoyson wishes to speak on a general item of business, would you like to come forward and make your comments?
Thank you, Leader. First, if I can introduce myself to the public behind me, I am councillor for one of the councillors for the Worthies ward. I also happen to be the chair of the Kings Barton Forum, which I have been now for 3 years. And prior to that, a year as a member of the Kings Barton Forum. I'm here to ask Cabinet to support my request for Council to consider that a community governance review that has been requested for the unparished area of Winchester City to also include all of Kings Barton. This should also include Barton Meadows, which is the ecology mitigation area for Kings Barton, and a walking amenity for the communities around it. I'd ask that the request includes also the area of land that is technically in Headbourne Worthy Parish, but is bordered by Courtney Road, Abbots Barton, and Barton Meadows, and the main train line. It may also be sensible to extend the community governance request to include all of Headbourne Worthy Parish, but that would be subject to how the Parish Council responds to the recent parish briefing. I'm fairly agnostic on that last bit, but I think it would be a good idea to ask them. Just as a bit of background context, there's been a couple of prior requests for a community governance review for Kings Barton. Each time when the date or the milestone came, the position has been that Kings Barton is not sufficiently built out to justify a community governance review in isolation just for that. And I have supported that reasoning. But with the local government reorganisation coming along, the unparished area of Winchester, which is currently overseen by the Winchester Town Forum, has requested that Council considers a community governance review for that area. The rationale for that makes sense to me, as, if you like, an outsider, but will no doubt be debated in council in due course. This unparished area of Winchester includes a part of the Kings Barton MDA. Currently, it's about 50 to 60 homes, which are east of Andover Road. That area also includes the smaller development known as Barton Farm, which is about 20 homes. The rest of Kings Barton, currently 650 homes, are in Headbourne-Worthy parish. The numbers within the unparished area are set to reach about 130 over the next couple of years, with the rest of Kings Barton, which will end up at nearly 2,000 homes in Headbourne-Worthy parish. Having Kings Barton straddling across two parishes makes no sense. People in Kings Barton tend to look south to Winchester City, or to some extent east to the shopping area in Week, both of which are in the unparished area. It creates difficulties in terms of agreeing handover and management of open spaces, places where people could vote, conversations about amenities such as community hall, recreation spaces that the developer is bringing forward that a community could shape. It also means that Headbourne-Worthy parish, which went through a 273% increase in size before the Kings Barton started being built to when the census was done in 2021. It's now at this stage more like a 400 to 500% increase in size. The fundamentals remain. Headbourne-Worthy Village and Kings Barton are physically and figuratively on opposite sides of the train tracks with very different concerns. One being a small, stable, mature parish, still centred around its church with concerns about flooding from the neighbouring areas, while Kings Barton is a new, growing suburban area of Winchester with a younger demographic and people who want to try and shape the place that they live in, often in tension with the developer who has its own master plan. If I can summarise my initial request, I'm just asking for support here to make a request to council to consider all of Kings Barton and Barton Meadows in the community governance review that has been requested for the unparished area of Winchester City. I'm obviously happy to take questions, but I know your agenda is very full today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. I will be making an announcement later which has relevance to the points that you have raised. The next item of business relates to the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 22nd of January 2025. Cabinet, do you agree these as a correct record? Thank you very much indeed. And our next item is Leader and Cabinet announcements. And I think we have one announcement, which is I received a formal invitation last Wednesday from Jim McMahon, the Minister of State for Local Government and English Devolution, formally inviting me to work with other council leaders in our area to develop a proposal for local government reorganisation. It set out further detail on the criteria, guidance for the development of proposals, and a timeline for the process. The formal deadline by which I and my colleagues have to submit a proposal is September the 26th, 2025, but we are asked to provide an interim proposal on or before March the 21st, 2025, which is 5.5 weeks' time. Shortly afterwards, I was copied into a letter confirming the creation of a new combined Hampshire-Solent authority with a mayor starting in May 2026. As far as local government reorganisation is concerned, I'd like to lay out what we've done since then and make some comments on the challenge that lies ahead. So on Wednesday evening, about 50 minutes after receiving the email, we held a briefing for parish councillors. I took them through what the white paper was saying about local government reorganisation and about the establishment of combined authorities, outlined some of the new powers that would be available and the process we were expecting to go through. But because one of the things we're required to do in the process is consult, I also raised some particular questions to the parishes which I've asked them to answer. Councillors in the unparished, so there were 4 of them. The first one was councillors in the unparished area of the city have asked the City Council to consider starting the process to create a town council. Could being part of the new town council make sense for your parish? The second question was to say that some parishes are interested in consolidating with neighbours to create scale in the context of new, very large unitaries. Is this something of interest to them? The third one is that unitaries are likely to face very major financial challenges. Are there district assets or functions which parishes would like to take on or protect? And the fourth one was to ask, some areas of the district may feel closer to a neighbouring unitary, such as, for example, a large Southampton or Portsmouth, and would they want that to be considered for their parish? I made clear that Cabinet members, councillors and officers will be happy to attend parish council meetings to hear views and discuss these points further. And coming back to Councillor Cremoisin's point, we will be actively listening to ward councillors and to nearby parishes to understand, and to our parishes to understand what options they think we should include in our plans. And we'll shortly be publishing a timetable by which we'd like ward members and parish councillors to respond. The following morning, I chaired a meeting of Hampshire Solent council leaders and chief executives. This needed less of a briefing as to the nature of the changes in front of us because we had all received a copy of the letter. The main item of business was agreeing a programme of work for the chief executives and for outside advisors to deliver the March 21st timetable, as well as a separate work stream to implement the new Hampshire Solent mayoralty and combined authority. We also agreed, in particular, that it was going to be important to confront the government with the full reality of the budget challenges in the county council and some of the unitaries within our area in any proposal, and not pretend that local government reorganisation can fully address this challenge unless it is genuinely the case. Then on Thursday evening, I briefed councillors on the detailed criteria that we're expected to achieve with any proposal. There are 6 criteria, but one of them doesn't apply to us. It relates to areas like Surrey that need to reorganise in order to achieve a combined authority deal, and we already have one of those. So there are 5 criteria that we will need to be thinking about during the process. The first is that a proposal should seek to achieve for the whole of the area concerned the establishment of a single tier of local government. The criteria make reference to sensible economic areas based around economic centres and the centres that people connect to. A sensible geography that, quote, enables an increase in housing supply, and a whole area plan. Their preference is that we reflect district boundaries, but they also make clear in the criteria that it is an option to split districts as well, as happened, for example, in Winchester in 1974, when the Winchester Rural District Council southern parishes were transferred to Eastleigh. The second was that unitary local government must be the right size to achieve efficiencies, improve capacity and withstand financial shocks. The figure cited that we need to try and achieve is 500,000 population, but that is very, very large. It's the equivalent of needing to combine probably 4 local authorities, 4 districts together. And they do make clear that we can make a case for a smaller authority, or for smaller authorities, if we believe that is sustainable. So it is absolutely the view of this council and many of the other districts and many of the other councils that we do need to look at how we can achieve a more local scale while still achieving financial sustainability. And it's important in all of this to remember that there are significantly smaller councils than 500,000 that still deliver great results and balance the books. The third criterion was that they must prioritise the delivery of high quality and sustainable public services to citizens. And this is, of course, incredibly important. Despite the challenges of local government reorganisation, bins must still be collected. The elderly and vulnerable must still be cared for. There must be no break in that. Children at risk and with special needs must be protected and supported. The fourth criteria is that proposals should show how councils in the area have sought to work together in coming to a view that meets local needs and is informed by local views. And to that end, I have asked officers to arrange a public briefing in the next couple of weeks, which we'll probably do online to enable as many people as possible to attend. And then I will be asking the Mayor and Chief Executive for a special full council and special cabinet meeting ahead of submission on March the 21st. And the fifth criteria is that new unitary structures should enable stronger community engagement and deliver genuine opportunity for neighbourhood empowerment. Plans to create a town council for Winchester are a step towards that, but we will need to have other discussions about how local voice is heard inside very large local authorities. So there are big challenges ahead of us. 500,000 does create enormous challenges. When it comes to local government, the clue is in the name. It's got to be local. And it's very hard to see how 500,000 combining 4 or more districts can be local. And it will be a big priority for this administration to try and ensure, as far as we're able, a more local connection for any authority that is created. The second challenge is that reorganisation risks being complicated, expensive and disruptive, and very difficult for the officers who have worked so hard for the public and for this council for many years. And money is still a very big problem. Tomorrow morning, Hampshire will be discussing a so-called Section 25 report in which the Chief Financial Officer concludes that the county's council's financial reserves are not adequate in the overall context of the financial position beyond the 25-26 financial year, and a high likelihood that the council will issue a Section 114 notice or trigger a further request for extraordinary financial support as well. Even after another round of cuts, the gap highlighted in the budget papers for discussion tomorrow is £97 million a year, which is far more than can be realistically achieved via local government reorganisation. But this council has faced challenges before. We were reorganised in 1974, 1932, 1836 and 1587, and many times before that, back at least to our first surviving charter in 1155. We've been a unitary for most of that history, so that's nothing new. Our powers have ebbed and flowed at the whim of kings, queens and governments. We've even had worse letters from government. During a brilliant recent tour of the Records Office, we saw the one from Oliver Cromwell threatening to flatten the city if the mayor didn't surrender the gates. So whatever Jim McMahon can do, it's not going to be as bad as that. But one common factor throughout our history genuinely stands clear in the records. This is a place that for over 800 years has believed that local decisions should be taken locally. And we stand alongside our predecessors in believing that still to be true today. But we also need to look to the future and have to face the challenges that confront us today and seize the opportunities too. Unitarisation has worked for us before and can work for us again. It's simpler and more straightforward for residents to engage with, although the numbers have to add up. But we are determined most of all that we will ensure that local people's voices are heard, good local services are provided, and that our city and district continues to thrive. That the challenge of reorganisation doesn't stand in the way of tackling the challenges of climate change, the nature emergency, the cost of living crisis, homelessness, social care, special educational needs, and ensuring that our city and district continue to be such a great place to be. Because that's what local government does. What it's done on and off for over 800 years, and what we will fight to ensure it continues to do into the future for many years to come. Thank you very much. Councillor Porter, would you like to introduce the paper?
Thank you very much indeed. And the papers are on page 9 to 56 of the papers. The purpose of this paper today is to approve the concept master plan process for Sir John Moore Barracks. The next stage is for the developer to move to outline planning permission. The site is set to be vacated in summer 2026. As previously developed land, the site known as W2 in the new local plan to 2040 has been identified as suitable for 750 to 1,000 homes. And although we didn't mention it in the list, homes for people in this district is also one of our priorities. So Winchester City Council's master planning policy was agreed in a previous paper, CAB C3408, last summer. Taking a site like this direct to the planning system is complicated and can constrain the process of consultation with the public about their aspirations for the area. So Winchester City Council's master planning process allows developers' planning team to work together with residents, the city's planning team and other interested parties to develop a concept master plan which becomes a material planning consideration when the planning application is made. The site has evolved over the decades, most recently a residential base for training personnel starting out on their military career, but in the Second World War and later it was a valuable listening station called Flowerdown, receiving and delivering intelligence to Bletchley Park. There's a history before that too. The site has a variety of levels, landscapes, and there are established buildings, roads and extensive tree belts which were planted approximately 40 years ago. Over the course of the consultation meetings with residents and others, several principles were established which comply with Policy W2 and support the development's vision and objectives. Those were public access to open spaces which were previously behind the wire, high quality management and improvement of the green spaces and conversations about the sink and the candidate sink, keeping significant buildings to be reused and retaining as much of the sporting infrastructure as possible. There should be a centre to serve residents' day-to-day needs to encourage 20-minute living, energy efficient homes of different types, including affordable homes, creation of a walkable neighbourhood with services within the development. The site should respect the neighbourhood gaps between Littleton and Harestock communities and provide excellent non-car links to nearby settlements. And that there should be recognition of the heritage of the site, both recently and in the past. And lastly, the park and ride car park to serve the north of Winchester will also provide good public transport links for this community and others north of Winchester. I was present at many of those public consultations and watched the process with interest. I can see that the public responses reflected are in this concept master plan. So I'm pleased to bring this concept master plan for approval to Cabinet today as it conforms to the master planning process, whilst recognising there's still more to do before the outline planning application is made. The resultant concept master plan includes 51 hectares of green open space, which is over 60% of the entire site of 86.5 hectares, and yet can still deliver between 750 to 1,000 homes. So I'd like to recommend that Cabinet notes the concept master plan process, including the public engagement strategy, undertaken by the applicants, which has helped to inform the preparation of the concept master plan, and has been undertaken following the Council's master planning framework process. And secondly, that Cabinet endorses the Sir John Moore Barracks Concept Master Plan Vision document that's attached as Appendix 1, which will then become material consideration to inform the development management assessment of the future planning application. And note that Cabinet is not taking a decision on whether the candidate sink will be agreed. This decision will be taken following the assessment and consideration of the future outline planning application. I think that Mrs. Pinnock has some slides which you may want to put up during this, but I think we also have the team from the DIO and Sir John Moore Barracks planning team here that may wish to also make some comments.
Clarity, do you want to do the slides as part of the introductory process, or is that
no? I
we're
think
there to respond to points that are made later on?
We know
thank you very much indeed.
And Julie Pinnock has got them available.
Right. Well, in that case, I will ask at this point in the meeting, Councillor David Tozer to come forward and make his comments on behalf of Littleton and Harestock Parish Council.
Good morning. As Vice Chair of Littleton and Harestock Parish Council, I appreciate the opportunity to present on this matter before you today. To be clear, the Parish Council has never been opposed to new housing on the existing developed part of the barracks site, but continues to have grave concerns regarding the use of the concept master plan to inform its future development, and considers that any endorsement of the master plan to be highly premature pending the outcome of the local plan review process, particularly in relation to both policy W2 and the settlement gap between Winchester and Littleton, which is left currently vaguer and consequently at greater risk of erosion. These key policies have not yet been tested via the local plan examination process. There is no guaranteed certainty regarding the outcome. Indeed, the master plan as currently proposed could end up in conflict with the recommendations of the inspector. The master plan, prepared by the promoter of the site, is being allowed to define planning policy in respect of key land uses, such as the number of dwellings, access points, etc. The current approach worryingly leaves too many important decisions to be developer-led through an informal process in advance of the outcome of the public plan inquiry. The master plan also proposes development on ecologically important land. The SINC advisory panel recommended in October 23 that the existing Flower Down SINC be extended to include the Northern Fields. City Council has yet to formally respond to this recommendation. This inertia is difficult to understand given City Council's Nature Emergency Declaration in September 23 and its key 25 to 30 plan objective to reverse the long-term decline in nature and biodiversity. Indeed, in paragraph 7.5 of the report, it's only for the first time that the materiality of the candidate SINC in the master plan process is formally recognised. The master plan itself only makes a passing reference to the candidate SINC on page 51, and there it effectively dismisses the idea. There is no clear reason why, as part of the development of the site, there could not be proactive management approach to enhancing the biodiversity of the Northern Fields, along with managed public access, as is proposed for the existing SINC. It appears from the report that rather than confirm the SINC designation and then assess the merits of any ecological losses, City Council is accepting there will be development in much of the Northern Fields. The endorsement of the master plan that proposes significant development within the candidate SINC area prejudices the council's consideration of this material consideration. The parish council considers this approach greatly undermines the credibility of the declared nature emergency, and rather than recognising a golden opportunity before it, it clearly promotes development at the expense of nature. Indeed, the recommendation before you suggests that you should only consider the candidate SINC in the aftermath of any future outline planning application. To conclude, the Parish Council today asks Cabinet to defer a decision on the master plan until the outcome of the local plan public examination is known, for as it stands, it appears that Cabinet is putting the cart before the horse, and to expedite the process of designating the Northern Fields as an extension of the existing SINC, so that the development of the site is led by nature considerations rather than development priorities. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed for your comments. I have comments from, I think, 3 councillors who have requested to speak. The first one is Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Cabinet, and forgive my nasal expressions post bad cold. Just picking up on a couple of things that have been said and what I've read. The statement that the concept master plan and vision document is a material consideration for future planning applications. I don't fully understand that because as I see it, it's a high-level illustrative and non-statutory vision, whereas perhaps a supplementary planning document can provide the necessary formal guidance on local plan policies and help really shape the emerging needs for the site. So my question then is, should we be working on a supplementary planning document as quick as possible for the site to ensure the best future-proofed outcomes? So grateful for clarification. It is positive that there is recognition in this concept master plan for the emerging policies CN1 and CN3 for the climate emergency declaration and low carbon net zero aspirations, which is really great to see. So, but what are the concept master plan's intentions for the emerging CN8 policy, whole life carbon, particularly embodied carbon? This is not clear. Deploying more generally cradle-to-cradle life cycle thinking would also enhance the vision. So can this be incorporated into the concept master plan for all aspects of the plan? The concept master plan reflects the agreed housing numbers, but it seems to lack any detail or indication of housing topology and optimal orientation for passive and active solar design, district heating options. These factors would directly impact the sustainability landscape and design principles. Is the footprint for the built areas big enough to optimize for these needs? I'd be grateful for clarification. It could also be agreed that, or could be argued that net zero energy is yesterday's thinking. We should be thinking about energy positive, E+ homes, smart homes, buildings as power stations, as pioneered by the Active Building Centre. Exemplar affordable home projects like Salsa Homes and Wunderhaus demonstrate how more homes could generate surplus energy for this site and beyond. So my question then is, does this concept master plan need to show provision space for grid upgrades, battery storage, and all the necessaries to try and achieve this? Combining green space, the stewardship models for the green space has already been mentioned, district heating, if needed alongside the E+ approach, and community energy could really make the site a beacon for sustainability with minimal, if not zero, impact on Winchester District. If you can consider the facilitating of electric vehicle, e-bikes with best designed layouts, there's a great opportunity, I think, with these enhancements. And I do wonder whether air quality should also be a feature in the concept master plan, as rising temperatures with worsening pollution impacts for our well-being of local residents and beyond, perhaps can be inculcated into this concept master plan. Good to see nature-based solutions mentioned, but I wonder whether there's more emphasis needed. Grey water recycling as a given. Hopefully, stormwater overload, as we know, needs much earlier consideration for attenuation measures with rising intensive rainfall levels. I believe this would impact on the design and layout of the concept master plan. I don't see also any mention of dementia-friendly designs, which should also be a key aspiration, given our aging population and growing importance in urban planning and housing design, recognized elsewhere. So can I ask for these aspects to be considered in this concept master plan? But I think it's clearly moving in the right direction, but I think it can be enhanced further. I hope these can be considered and my points clarified. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. The next speaker is councillor wishing to make a deputation is Councillor Horrell. Would you like to come forward?
Chair, good morning and thank you for allowing me to address Cabinet today. I'm here as the councillor for Wonston and Micheldever Ward, one of three, and this includes the Sir John Moore site in our ward, and therefore we have a very significant vested interest in the concept master plan. We understand the Sir John Moore development is an absolutely crucial part of the local current plan submission, which is giving us up to 1,000 new homes, the largest provider of new homes in our current draft plan. Do we believe that the review of the current Regulation 19 submission with the inspector will make any material difference to the Sir John Moore concept master plan, given the policy relating to Sir John Moore clearly has not been examined yet, and indeed many aspects of this master plan are not clearly defined. We also have the moving parts of the NPPF and other government regulation that we're awaiting. How are we as members supposed to know how we're able to adopt this plan when there is so much uncertainty around the current regulations and plan submission. The lack of a decision regarding the candidate sink is regrettable in the concept master plan and clearly indicates that the developer is keen to build on the northern fields, which is a regrettable step given the size of the site and the opportunity to still accommodate the number of houses required elsewhere. Although the Cabinet paper says that the decision on the sink is not being taken today, by virtue of accepting the concept master plan and the use of the northern part of the site, one would be forgiven for assuming that the request for a sink will be rejected. Indeed, supporting the Northern Fields development seems to predetermine the sink decision. Chair, I'm slightly surprised, given the level of discussion about this site, that we've still not landed in this document on a number of homes that are likely to be built. At the moment, it still says circa 900 in the concept master plan. And I think it would be helpful if the DIO were more precise about the number that they are considering, given they have been working on densities, and as part of that work, they advocate they must build in the northern fields. I'm also intrigued by the focus in the concept master plan on the retention of the existing sports provision on the site. The council, I believe, is currently updating its needs assessment for facilities in the district, which to the best of my knowledge is still not available to us. On that basis, I do not know how we can understand what is needed on this site to meet any unmet needs in the district as far as sports provision is concerned. Will the sports provision be amended in the master plan once this important review of all facilities in the district is known? Can I ask what a community-based stewardship vehicle will involve, which is mentioned in the site opportunities section? And how will green infrastructure and estate stewardship be managed and funded going forward? I know this is an important question locally. The land is allocated on the site for park and ride, which we know is one of the primary requirements for the Winchester Movement Strategy. However, who will be funding the development of this park and ride facility? It's great that the land is allocated and will be a real help to traffic movement in this part of our district. But ensuring it comes to fruition will be about the cost of building it, and that is not clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell, for your comments, which we'll address shortly. Councillor Godfrey, would you like to come and make your comments?
Good morning, thank you. I welcome the retention of most of the woodland and the creation of a nature park in this concept master plan. Although I am concerned about the remodelling of this nature park may require of the existing land, as any crafting of this area might cause more harm than good. I also welcome the public access to the green infrastructure within the development area. Although I share the concerns of my neighbours about the delayed consideration of a candidate sink in the northern fields, as it seems to make the possible adoption of the concept master plan premature. I join residents in not being opposed to the development of a barracks for up to 1,000 homes, but that must be in the context of protecting the rural character of Littleton. It's a small, very old rural village with a very mature conservation area. It is not part of a city, it is not part of a town. And the concept master plan does not reflect that. While welcome and vehicle access is now only to the east of the site via Andover Road, including for the park and ride, the master plan does show potential proposed development that almost encircles the whole of the eastern side of Littleton Village. Loss of all northern fields is not necessary. Contrary to the report, 1,000 homes can be delivered without building the low density housing proposed in the master plan. These can go elsewhere in the site. As Councillor Horrell said, more protection is being given to the existing sports pitches, for which there is no evidence of local need, and amenity land around the existing buildings in the barracks, such as the officers' mess, than for the completely undeveloped grassland in the northern fields. There is no nature, ecology, or biodiversity that needs protecting on these open areas. There is an excellent local sports facility less than 100 metres from the edge of the barracks, that more than meets the needs of the existing community and the future residents of the new estate. So long as a master plan were to properly respect the Littleton Gap, requiring the amendment of the master plan to show development of on the open spaces within the current boundary of the barracks, rather than the virgin grassland in the northern fields, we would achieve this council's nature and biodiversity priorities much more effectively. 18 months ago, the Cabinet adopted the Littleton Village Design Statement as a supplementary planning document. In that VDS, the master plan for Sir John Moore Barracks was expressly committed to comply with the main points in the VDS. In it, it states the master plan must pay particular attention to the relationship and connectivity between the existing village and the proposed development, and to maintain the feel and ambience enjoyed by the residents of the existing village. And yet there are several key areas that we've heard about this morning where the VDS is being ignored. Explicitly, the protection of the Littleton Gap from development and the retention of the northern fields as open grassland. The commitment that the Cabinet made in adopting the Littleton VDS needs to be reaffirmed today by requiring changes to the master plan. Given my assertion that this master plan is being considered prematurely, please ask for the concept master plan to be adjusted to reflect our existing policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. Councillor Porter, would you, along with officers, like to respond to the points made?
Could we ask the DIO team to join the table, please?
Yes, if the DIO
I'm calling that generally.
team could come
They're all
forward,
from different places.
that could be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. And Mrs. Pinnock, I think probably, and Ms. Hutchings it would be appropriate to ask. Sorry, Lorna, it would be helpful if you would answer if we get to that point we need you, or Mrs. Pinnock. Thank you. Just wanted to, shall I move this closer? So that might make it easier. Let's move that. That better? That better? Good. Okay. Sorry about that. Firstly, Mr. Tozer, thank you for your comments. I think that you have expressed this concern about the gap between Littleton and Harestock, and I think we've made it very clear in the paper that we will respect the gap between Littleton and Harestock, but at the same time trying to create usable routes between them, because most people in most communities find friends and services in other communities which they think are useful. So it is not about breaking down the principle of a gap. It's just merely providing routes between. I think you've also mentioned about the Flowerdown Sink to Northern Fields. There is a new survey being done of that land, and we can look at that again when that survey is complete. I'm hoping that Mrs. Pinnock can just talk about that in a bit for us. And there, you actually say that there's no clear reason for there couldn't be a plan for increasing the sink area. Well, actually, the sink needs to be not just identified but managed, well managed. And I think that's what we're most concerned about, that we have enough money in the system out of this plan to be able to manage all of the nature areas really well. As I said, it's quite a large area. It's about 60% of the area would become a green managed nature park in some form or another, some for public access, some without, but it does need that to be financed as well. I do really appreciate the fact that you say the Parish Council recognised the golden opportunity before it, but that's why we specifically have said in this paper that we will identify the candidate sink as whether it is a sink or not at the planning stage. And you've asked the council to defer the decision on the master plan. Well, the master plan, the principle of the master plan is that we can continue to work with the developer, and it isn't just set in stone as of today. And I think that's the point about the master plan, and the point I was trying to bring out at the beginning, that if you just go straight to an outline planning permission, there is no opportunity for this sort of dialogue. And having the concept master plan gives you this opportunity of this sort of dialogue. I'm just going to go on to Councillor Lee, but actually perhaps the team might like to respond to some of the points that Littleton and Harestock have made, and might like to talk about their ongoing dialogue with Littleton and Harestock.
Yes, I'm very happy to do that. So my name's Ian Woodward. I'm responsible for a number of the larger sites that we have. And also I'm conscious that this particular site is very sensitive, but it does need to come forward for development. It is going to be vacated. And from our point of view, it's very important that what we have here is a legacy scheme for Winchester and for, in fact, the army who have been in Winchester for many years. Turning to some of the points that are made in terms of the settlement and the settlement gap and the scale of the development, we've tried to be extremely sensitive here in terms of bringing forward the scheme. There are density issues on any scheme that comes forward, and there are challenges in terms of balances that you have to make across the whole site. We did, following the concerns for Littleton Parish, concentrate development in the built area initially. We looked at the scale of that development, we looked at the concepts there. What we found in the end, working actually with the officers as well in Winchester, is that the density of the scheme would be just too dense for Winchester. Winchester wouldn't be familiar with the densities. It would be more like a urban development in London. And also the constraints that would be imposed on the site in terms of networks of roads, parking, etc., would make it very cluttered. It would not actually make a very nice place to live, to be honest. So what we've had to do is look at how we distribute the development across the site whilst creating that openness that everybody wants in Winchester, and the great opportunity that this site offers for that 60% sort of open space behind the wire that nobody's really had access to. And we know we get a few people sneak in occasionally at the top end, but that's by the by. So the reality here is we do want to create a balanced scheme. We want to create a scheme for everyone, and it's very important that the settlement caps are maintained, but also the existing sports facilities that are there are maintained in terms of the sports pitches, because that also helps people where more density of development has taken place. They've got access to those facilities as well, and the northern site is quite sloping. So from that point of view, we believe that we have looked at this holistically, and we recognise that a number of compromises or balanced judgments have to be made to create a scheme which is attractive, it has presence, and it will be attractive neighbourhood, and will also enable people to have safe access through it, into it, and enjoy it.
Thank you. I think on the you put the original concept map up? I think it's quite useful to have that. The concept master plan map. Okay, Councillor Lee, you just talked about, or you talked about the fact that it was a good exemplar of the positive aspects of this, but you wanted to see more. And you mentioned about district heating, and I wondered if the team would like to talk just about district heating, please.
Yeah, I think I should just expand it a little bit more than just district heating in terms of the sustainability of the site. It's very important for us as sort of experienced developers, and I would say we're developers, not just MOD and DIO. The key thing here is we need to understand the distribution of the development across the site. That's one of the reasons why the master plan has to come forward, and we need to understand that first. Because once we know the scale of it, we can then start to feed in all of the very good things that Councillor Lee mentioned. The master plan at the moment is in sort of holistic, generic form, but in terms of the sustainability, there are plenty of things that he said that we will support and endorse. In terms of district heating, yes, it has been done before on a number of our sites. In fact, in terms of military sites, we do use district heating. One of the issues with district heating, though, is to making sure that you have that momentum of development that you can actually develop out at some pace to enable the economics to work. We will also look at ground source heat pumps. We'll look at all of the EV. We'll look at all of the PV. And we do actually like this to be a net contributor to the grid if we can get to that stage. In terms of battery storage, we will also use that. We haven't had the opportunity. We've had discussions internally as a team, but in terms of actually now facilitating that, we need to wait until we've got through this concept master plan stage and get an understanding that we're in the right direction, so we can then apply all of these good techniques to make it effectively zero carbon, or as near as zero carbon as possible.
Thank you. And I think there are several other points that he raised, and I think that's exactly the point, Councillor Lee. The concept master plan, once it's agreed, gives you the opportunity to continue with those conversations up until you get to the planning stage. So, but you need to know where things are going to be on a site in order to have that conversation and to work out really where and how those things could work for this development. One of the things I was going to mention, though, that you talked about nature-based solutions for stormwater flows, and this has been a really prime part of our conversation. I don't know if Mrs. Pinnock would like to talk about this or whether the team would like to. It's up to you.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of water flow, so we have done fluvial analysis across the whole site. We did this right at the very beginning. We recognise that there is a groundwater issue, let's say on the site, particularly on the Winterbourne, as they call it. Now, the Winterbourne could be a slight misnomer, to be honest. We're not trying to say that it isn't there. It does exist, but its actual route is ill-defined. What we believe that we need to do as part of the master plan is define that route and work with the Environment Agency to see exactly where that route will be. There are issues of sort of short-term flooding that we recognise that come from Littleton, and the site has the capacity to cope with that. But we do believe that we need to define the Winterbourne's route a little bit more. Having said all of that, all of the development or proposed development is outside that route, apart from the park and ride. The park and ride component, just dealing with that, that is where groundwater becomes elevated. It doesn't become elevated generally because of fluvial flows. It's purely because the groundwater increases. We know when that would take place because we can monitor it. Sometimes it happens once a year, sometimes it's once every 3 years, but it isn't a challenge to the actual location of the park and ride because there's no actual flow through that particular route. So I just wanted to deal with that. In terms of other areas, generally the site is well drained, and to be honest, it's very positive in terms of flows of the very limited flow of water across it. So we think that in terms of flooding, that's fine. What we've got to make sure is that we don't put any additional burden on the downstream flows at all, which we will do through SUDS and other well-known examples to deal with that.
Thank you. And actually, we have been working as parish councils side by side as in my own district role. I'm very well aware of the work that's been done by the county council, by EA, by yourselves, by the water companies on this work, and I know that it's a prime part of the concern there. I think right, whether it's premature to do a pre-examination of the plan as a concept master plan. Mrs. Pennant, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you very much. We are at an advanced stage in our local plan. We are at Reg 19 stage, and we are just about to hopefully get through an examination. So it's quite right, in my view, that we start working on concepts and master planning, so as any development that comes forward aligns with that. And I think, I mean, Mr. Fox is here from our strategic planning team that could probably say a little bit more about prematurity if that was helpful. But my view is it's very much, this is a precursor, isn't it, to an outline planning application, as you said. And actually, we want to be and get the concept master planning process is about being engaged in the process and enabling that public engagement. And that's very much what's happened here. There have been 3 rounds of public engagement. I know Nikki Davis perhaps could talk on that later, but there's been some significant engagement, and that wouldn't have normally happened if we didn't have a concept master planning process. We might have just arrived with an outline planning application even now, with, you know, pre our local plan examination. So I think this is the right process. This is what we want to encourage developers to do, is come and engage with us as a city council, but also engage with local residents, ward members and parish councils. And I really sort of welcome this approach, and I don't think it's premature in my view.
Thank you. This may be the time to invite Nikki to talk about the public consultation.
Sure. So as Julia said, we've held 3 rounds of engagement to date. The first looked at the kind of development principles and asked people to sense check that with us, as well as talk to us about vision, and then identify anything else that they wanted us to look at deeper as we moved through to our second stage, which consisted of a series of workshops, which members of the public were invited to. I know yourself were there. A few of the members around the table were there, held over a couple of days, where we looked at kind of the main constraints and opportunities of the site. We did a detailed look around densities. I think the master planning team did an excellent job of presenting kind of local densities that are seen across Winchester and how that would look if you map that across the site. And I think there was some really good conversations with a variety of different stakeholders around densities, which helped us arrive at the plan you see in front of you. But we also looked at things like how you embed community benefits within the site, and what the area needs, what the local areas already have that we need to connect to, but what also this site needs to deliver for the community that will live there. We looked at heritage in a big way. We had an excellent, how many pages was it? 90-page document from a local resident who's looked at it in detail, and lots of that will be reflected as we move through to kind of plotting in heritage trails and other pieces of heritage that we can embed within the site. And we looked at sustainability and climate, the climate crisis, and how we use this site to positively address those issues. From those kind of detailed exercises, we moved through to kind of actually putting pen to paper on a concept master plan. And it was through the 3rd round of engagement that we tabled that for the first time with the local community. We had an interactive mapping tool digitally, which the community were able to use to kind of put pins on the concept master plan, as you see. And actually, we also did a site tour with the community as well. I think one of the things we found was that not many people had been behind the wire, so didn't know necessarily how the land lay and how development would be articulated across the site. And so that was really useful. We had over 90 people across the day. We've talked about how kind of 3 main issues have come out of that, and how it's been a balance between those 3 issues that we've had to come to through work with officers, statutory consultees, the parish council and other bits of the local community around density, around kind of sport provision and how that is articulated, and then access to and movement through the open spaces. And as has already been said, we feel that this is the master plan is an accurate reflection of kind of where we've got to in that discussion around balance, but it's definitely not the end. So we've got another round of engagement plan. That will be our 4th round of engagement, and that will be focused on the outline planning application, so a slightly more detailed stage. We intend to invite members of the community and stakeholders to something in kind of late spring, early summer. But our website will remain live. We have a free phone line. We've got an email address. So this is definitely just a step in the journey towards further dialogue with the community. And we look forward to getting to that stage.
Thank you. And it is interesting that when people had actually been there, they had such a different impression than when they just knew about it. Even from an aerial view, it has a very different feel. The other question that came up was not defining the number of homes to be built. I wonder if anybody would like to comment on that. That'd be for you, Rob.
Yeah, thank you through you, Chairman, and in response to your question, Councillor, I think it would be quite unusual to define it in those terms at this level of detail, and that might be considered too prescriptive. So that would be quite normal to go for that range. At this stage, we've tested a scenario, we've tested a number which we're comfortable works well. It could be more, it could be fewer, but that's quite normal at this stage of the process. Thank you.
Okay. And the question about sports provision in the master plan, do you want to take that one up as well? So the question really was, why should we be providing sport here when it's available?
So I'll just answer that, and perhaps Rob will come in on a technical basis. But from our point of view, in terms of MOD DIO, we've invested in the facilities there quite significantly. We recognise that as a community facility, that would be very useful to retain. It does have to be viable, though, on a standalone basis. Just so you're aware, DIO cannot sort of allow or have bursaries or some form of sort of trust that we set up and that we maintain in perpetuity. But we are actively looking at how it can be maintained. We're looking at the viability of it, and our hearts and minds, let's say, are there to see if we can retain it, particularly the swimming pools, etc. The reality, though, is that we will have to be cognizant of the wider Winchester sports strategy, and once that's available to us, then we will also be able to adapt, amend and shape whatever it does go there. So we have got alternative options if we do not proceed on that basis, or indeed we can't proceed because it's not viable. So we're keeping the options open at the moment. We'd like to keep this as a community facility if possible, but in reality it'll come down to viability and your wider strategies across Winchester. But Rob, do you want to add anything else?
Very little. We've got to be very careful that we don't provide something or produce something on the site which compromises existing facilities elsewhere and compromises the viability of those. There's a comprehensive exercise to go through with Sport England in association with your leisure and recreation officers, which takes that holistic view of sports provision in the wider area and makes sure that creating one particular area, facilities in one area doesn't compromise others, and you look at things across the city, and that's very much the point of what we're doing and why there is the flexibility around that. Thank you.
So effectively, we're keeping an open mind on that, which is, I think, what we're all very keen to do, rather than just making a decision one way or the other.
Absolutely, an open mind and a flexible master plan that can respond to the circumstances as they exist on the ground.
Thank you. And the other question really, I think, ties back possibly to Mrs. Pinnett, which is about the park and ride being a primary development and of real help to traffic movement, and to include it in the design. I'm not asking about the costings, that's a matter for us to work through, but to include it into this site is a very key part of the design.
Yeah, the park and ride is critical. It's a policy requirement in the Reg 19 local plan, and it's something that's very much identified through the work that the council's done with the Winchester Movement Strategy, So yeah, you're right. We can't talk about the finances particularly, but yes, it needs to be delivered as part of this concept master plan. So it needs a space to be identified for that, and then the detail will follow.
So this is a land planning process.
Yeah,
And
very much.
that's the point, to identify land for that facility is really important. Sorry, Councillor Godfrey mentioned not being opposed to the 1,000 homes, but protecting the rural character of Littleton. How would you say that you're protecting the rural character of Littleton?
So, well, we have and maintain a close dialogue with the parish. We understand the sensitivities. They will already recognise that we have pulled back some original development that was considered in that further northern area. But that said, that we are really sensitive about the village itself. We recognise that the village has its own character. We're not looking to constrain that or adapt it. We suspect, as we have seen, this is me talking in a broader context of development now, that once this scheme comes forward and has all of the facilities that it will have and the neighbourhood nature of it and the accessibility in terms of pedestrian cycles to it, that it will become a benefit to Littleton. I don't think it'll become a constraint. I don't think it will actually end up having built development adjacent to the sort of final edges of the scheme. We've pulled a lot of that development back to make it much more receptive to Littleton itself in terms of the tree-lined vistas, etc., and views from the wreck, I think they call it, but that area, we're definitely maintaining all those vistas, so you will not see any change in terms of that, the actual settlement and how it sits within the topography. We're very fortunate because of the wooded areas and also the topography that we can develop this scheme out in a very sensitive way that will not burden at all the vistas from Littleton and change its character.
Thank you. I think I've covered most things that came up in that. If there's anything else you wanted me to raise, I can do so.
Yes, thank you. There were a few things that I think we need to explore just a little bit more. Yeah, no, I'm still previous ones. I don't know if Cabinet colleagues have any questions they want to kick off on, or if we just probe some of the remaining issues, but maybe your questions will bring those to life anyway. Councillor Lerney.
Thank you, Leader. I think it would be useful if we could expand a bit on how we'll manage the candidate sink as part of the planning process going forward.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to start off on that. I mean, we picked up these questions, haven't we, through the local plan review, through scrutiny and everything. The candidate sink was identified based on surveys that were undertaken back in 2021. What we've always said is and maintained is that as part of an allocation in the local plan, there is already a sink within the site, within the southern part of the site, that we should make sure that the survey work is up to date, and the DIO team have been doing that right through to the end of last year. That will inform the wider principles of an application, an outline planning application going forward. And we think a candidate sink is a material consideration as part of a planning assessment. And we think it's the right time at that stage to consider all of that additional updated survey work, as well as the concept master plan, if you would decide to endorse that today, and all the other material planning considerations that come in to making a planning assessment on an allocated site in a local plan, which we may well be at that stage by the time an outline planning application comes before us as a planning authority. So it's right that we wait and make that final decision on designation of a sink, or alternatively, whether the existing sink is managed and maintained in a different way. So I think all that management regime and those details are right to come out as part of the wider outline planning application. And that's why your office are recommending that approach. It's not an approach we've taken unilaterally. I have discussed that with the Hampshire County Council team that deal with the identification of sinks. It is a City Council decision whether to endorse that approach or not, and they're happy with our approach. I think they think that's the right thing based on surveys undertaken in 2021 that need to be updated and reviewed for 2024-25 going forward with an outline planning application assessment. So I think that's our position, and I think that's the right position to take in terms of a local plan allocation as well.
Any other questions? I'd like just to explore a bit further this question of prematurity, because it's been talked about in the context of the local plan. There's been a reference to the SINC decision, there's been a reference to sports provision, and I suppose it comes back to what is the nature of what we're actually deciding on today, because obviously it's not an outline planning permission. As I understand it, it sets direction, but presumably this is something where if later in the process new information becomes available which says something needs to change, that's not a problem for the process, or is it? Could that be clarified?
Yeah, we're at a concept master planning stage, so we're looking at the general principles of how this site could be developed, how the land could be dispersed, how the land uses could be dispersed in terms of creating that wider census place. But equally, as you said, and I think the DIO team already said this, that yes, it guides the principles forward to an outline planning application. It frames the work that's undertaken in terms of a lot of the survey work, a lot of the highway work, a lot of that thinking, a lot of as you already heard, the flooding, the survey work there. So I think it's a really important part of the process in my view. And I think I've already said it, it's in public. Whereas you might end up with an outline planning application where none of this had been done in public, it hadn't been tested. So I think, in my view, it's not premature because it's a precursor to a planning application, and that's what everyone is always working towards. The benefit of this is that it's actually done in an open and transparent way, and everyone gets to contribute towards that. And I think you're right. Yes, there is opportunity to amend thinking as other issues arise prior to the submission of an outline planning application. But it guides the development.
Thank you very much. And on the local plan question in particular, I mean, I know that we have the public inspection in, I think, April. But do we have any sense of, for example, at what point do they tell us that, for example, they might want to talk about the details of the Littleton policy? Is that something that we already know, or does that will we find out in April?
We will find out what the inspector wants to focus on in terms of discussion days through the examination. Mr. Fox is here. We could ask him to come up and flesh that out a little bit if that would help Cabinet in terms of understanding that process.
I think it is useful just to understand that.
Thank you. Hello, members. Yeah, so in terms of the local plan examination, we are anticipating it to be around April, May. We're still waiting for the inspector to basically clarify that. The next stage is basically that we are expecting what's called matters, issues and questions from the inspector. That, as Mrs. Pennick outlined, will basically explain the questions that the inspector wants us to answer. And we'll be given a specific deadline to respond to those, as will other parties as well be asked to respond to those issues. So we'll have a greater clarification. I'm hoping before the end of the month that we should have greater clarification on those matters, issues and questions. And like I say, it is up to the inspector to determine basically the issues that they want to discuss at the examination and who they wish to invite to attend the examination to actually speak. So we are very much in the planning inspectorate's hand. And obviously the inspector has seen all the representations. So that's what they're basing the matters, issues and questions on. They're going through those representations at the moment and identifying the key issues that they want to discuss at the examination. So at the moment, like I say, we're in their hands, but I'm hoping before the end of the month we'll have more clarification.
That's helpful. Thank you very much indeed. So that's useful to know. So we do. Okay, so in terms of the prematurity question, I think if we were locking it in, if it was an outline planning permission, it would be a problem if we didn't have this information. But because it is sort of setting an indicative direction and making some choices as to sort of preference rather than the planning decision, it is less of a problem because there can be adjustment later on. I think Councillor Cutler wants to ask a question.
I think it's related in that I think it would be helpful to clarify the concept master plan is a material consideration, and I think that's what's causing some of the confusion. Is Councillor Lee talked about a supplementary planning document, which we know is far more fixed, and I think trying to explain or clarify the extent to which it's a material consideration, because we're discussing something that is very much a concept, and you've talked about the fact that it can be varied because of change of circumstances. So how, in what respect is it a material consideration? I suppose that just trying to clarify some of that would be useful.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a really useful question, actually, because it's one of all of the material planning considerations. So it's not the material planning consideration. It's not the primary. So we'll start off with the development plan. We'll start off with national policy guidance, our emerging local plan. Depending on the time frame of an outline planning application, will depend on which local plan we're looking at to make that decision. But when we have a planning application in front of us, it will be just one of all of the material planning considerations that will be considered in the planning balance. So it doesn't trump anything else. It doesn't sit above national planning policy guidance, which could change at any time between now and any planning submission, or any other statutory consultee comments. It's just one of those matters that when you're reaching your final planning balance, it'll be one of those things you'll factor in. And it is around process, in my view. And as you say, it's very high level. It's not going to say, well, because that was there, that's always going to be there. It's informing that wider submission that comes at a future date.
Yes, I'm also conscious that we had a question about green infrastructure and stewardship of the green spaces. And the DIO and you have been very clear in that you've got experience of doing this. Would you like to explain how you envisage this green space being managed?
Yeah, this is obviously a very important component to the scheme. We're very familiar with dealing with this type of space. We manage significant areas of land. We've got massive training estates, which we have to manage as well. So we're familiar with this territory. And colleagues of mine also who are here today are actively involved and on boards that relate to these trusts. So we tend to set up a trust to manage the green infrastructure. There will be finance made available to set that trust up, to make sure that it's run efficiently, to ensure that there's community engagement in relation to it, and there's a sort of joint board as to how things are taken forward to consider the habitats that are being protected, and also in terms of the use of the respective green spaces, making green space safe. We will, I'm certain, be looking at taking some of the trees down. This is not for the development purposes, this is to actually enhance the flora and fauna that relate there. The trees that exist on the site were mainly put in the 1980s, a long time ago, by the military, a bit formulaic, to be honest. There's very little broadleaf trees there. But they are now, they would look to see how we'd manage those spaces as well. So it's basically set up in a trust where the community and the existing residents also engage across the piece, and we will help finance that in the shorter to medium term as it's growing. Over time, though, we find that they become totally self-sufficient and they work very efficiently with the local communities engaging. And we can provide far more information about it as well at a later stage in our application.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's the question that I think Councillor Horrell had about community-based stewardship vehicle. That's the model you've used in other places.
Indeed.
And again, I suppose, presumably that, I mean, if you get into the sort of nuts and bolts of a outline planning application, that's something that ends up as a 106 obligation or something like that. So again, we're not making the absolute final decision on that today, but we are saying there will be this community-based stewardship vehicle is the direction of travel at the moment.
Indeed,
if I've understood correctly.
Yeah.
Have you, just as interest, I mean, obviously there are other models in the sense that we know that the Barton Meadows Nature Reserve is managed by the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. And there are other natural areas such as Cheriton Common, which are managed by councils, whether parish or district. So I just wondered why that particular model.
Through you, Chairman. Yeah, there are various different models, as you say, and it's quite common practice to include a sort of ratchet within the 106. So you might say what your top choice would be. It might be the parish council. If not the parish council, it goes to a wildlife trust, and then if not a wildlife trust, it goes to a regional wildlife trust as opposed to a local one. And then it goes down through. It can go down through the choices to the one of sort of last resort, which is essentially a management company. But my experience of this is that you get somebody to take it on long before you get to that. The key thing is to make sure you don't end up with the situation where the space is not managed. It has a permanent home, and there's plenty of ways to draft that as part of the legal agreement.
Thank you. One question. I think there was a question about a dementia-friendly design, but I'm guessing that does fall later in the process. But I see nods for that. The village design statement, is that something that you've looked at? I mean, it's not particularly clear on the subject of what should happen at Flowerdown, but or Sir John Moore. Is that something that has been looked at as part of the process?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yeah, very much so. I mean, we're having regard to all the material planning considerations, and that's one of them. So, and it's an important one, yes, in terms of looking at moving forward how this site should be developed. But a village design statement is always in conformity with the local plan. So they do sit in harmony together. So it's very much part of our assessment.
Sorry, on the question of a sink, there was a reference made to predetermination. So I'd just like to understand how our decision making is affected and whether that's something we need to be mindful of. In other words, that by taking a decision today, we might be predetermining the result of the sink decision.
Thank you very much, Chair. No, my view would be that wouldn't be the case. This obviously has the status of interim planning guidance, and it's only a material consideration to the determination of planning applications. So that matter would potentially only arise at the planning committee that was determining any ultimate application.
Thank you. Are there any other questions that we have? Has anybody spotted anything that in the comments made or in their own reading of the papers that they think needs investigation? Or have we covered everything? Sounds like we think we may have covered everything. Do we have any debate or comments that Councillor Lerney?
Thank you, Leader. As a ward councillor for part of the site and the urban area to the south, as well as a resident of Hairstock, I can say that this is locally uncontroversial. We've currently got a WhatsApp going for another site for just 200 houses, which has over 300 people on it, all ready to oppose. And actually, this is broadly supported by the local community. The major concern being raised with me is whether failing to progress the Sir John Moore development puts alternative sites at risk. And I think it's important that we do keep moving these sites forward so that we can help demonstrate land supply going forward and keep control of the planning process. This is going back a bit in history, but I think it's worth remembering that policies for Kings Barton weren't actually put into the local plan until after it was given planning permission by the Secretary of State, after the council turned it down, partly on the grounds of prematurity. And we are dealing with some of the outcomes of failing to deal with some of those policy issues much earlier. And I think it's really good, actually, that we're keeping ahead of the curve on this one. Recommendation 3 does make clear that Cabinet is not taking the decision on the candidate sink. And in the light of the nature emergency declaration, I think this is a subject which needs more consideration and a focus on outcomes. The experience of the existing sink is that defining a sink does not in itself help nature thrive. Years of neglect rather than active management has degraded the value of the land for nature rather than increased it. Smaller, well-managed amounts of land can do far more for nature recovery than leaving large areas to go wild. Although in this case, we are talking about a very considerable area, not just a small pocket within an urban development. Experience also tells us, and we've got a good example local to the site in Barton Meadows, where the exclusion of the public from most of the site has led to a lot of complaints from local people. It is being in nature that's important to people, and access to nature on people's doorstep is something else that was part of the council's nature emergency declaration. We know the benefits to mental health and well-being from even small pockets of the natural environment, but this is a very large area proposed for public access and within easy reach of my residents in the urban area. I am comfortable with moving forward the proposals in the master plan for the Northern Fields, given that the relative benefits to nature and the potential extension to the sink will be tested alongside the planning process. There are no proposals to open up the existing sink to public access, but I think there is an opportunity for better management and better outcomes for nature within that area. Final proposals for the whole site will of course be expected to give the required biodiversity net gain overall, and to be compliant with the biodiversity and natural environment policies in the emerging local plan, and I'm thinking specifically about NE1, protecting and enhancing biodiversity in the natural environment, and NE8, biodiversity. Putting my cabinet transport hat on, clearly there is a lot of work to be done on transport, but I very much welcome the pedestrian and cycle prioritisation in the master plan, giving easy access to schools and other local facilities without needing to use a car. There are still 1,300 homes still to be built at Kingsbarton, and we do have to minimise increases in traffic flows resulting from further development. In that light, the inclusion of the park and ride provision on this site is incredibly important. While there is provision for 200 park and ride light spaces at Kingsbarton, this will be served by existing bus routes. It is only by providing a considerable increase in spaces at Sir John Moore that we can run a financially viable park and ride service to the north of Winchester. This provision is also likely to be key to providing buses into rather than running past the new development on the Andover Road. While developers of large sites are normally required to subsidise public transport during build out, as we've seen elsewhere, this funding rapidly gets used up, and we cannot require bus companies to provide long-term bus services as part of the planning process. So overall, I very much welcome us moving forward on this, and I'm supportive of the recommendations that are in front of us today.
Thank you, Councillor Learning. Anyone else want to make any comments? Councillor Porter, do you have any sort of final thoughts?
Yes, I'd just like to go back again to the principle of the concept master plan, which is that it's introduced to the community for their comment and a response to that comment by the developer. And it is, as Mrs. Pinnock said, it's an opportunity to have those conversations. And things came forward during that, which were really practical and made us really think and made the team really think about what was important to create that community, and the reaction of the neighbouring communities as well, and what they wanted out of it. So I think it's a really positive step that we have a concept master plan. it tackles so many things, right from embodied carbon and the nature, the dealing with the nature on the site, as well as the densities and the conversations we had about the facilities that that site could bring for other people as well as themselves, and the strong ethos of walking and cycling which came through the whole site as well. So I think it was a real opportunity to explore that with the public without the, I'm going to say, the peril of an outline planning permission sitting there. It's a conversation that carries on, and the fact that a fourth consultation is going to take place between this and any planning permission is really the way we should be wanting to go as a local authority for large developments. It shows that we are committed to listening to the public better, and I think that's what I'm really very supportive of, the principle, and that's why I'd like to see this endorsed today.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. We currently have a national planning system which is setting us very ambitious targets. The previous government set us very ambitious targets. The current government is setting even more ambitious targets. And that means that as a council, we have the duty to be enabling developments to come forward. And I think it's helpful that we have a process that is encouraging the high levels of consultation of the kind that has been referred to earlier and which is still to come, and enabling us to have this early thinking about whether things are going in the right direction. Because we need new houses, but they've got to be done right. They've got to be well designed. They've got to be good places. They've got to have the right infrastructure, the right support, the right facilities. People's frustration is when we lose control of the planning process. And we'll be talking about the local development scheme shortly. But what we know is that people want the kind of discussions that we're having today to make sure that developments are properly thought through and meet the needs of the wider community and the immediate area. And so I'm very pleased that we're having this discussion, and I'm very pleased at the work that's gone into bringing what we see as today. It has highlighted certain issues that are still not fully taken through to the end. This question of nature is a really important one. I understand the frustration. What we see with how nature is being managed as we take the nature emergency more seriously is that we're not always getting the balance right. We were talking earlier about Barton Meadows. I think the real questions about that model we've ended up with, where we've set a sink, we've put a fence around it, and people's engagement is with nature is to walk around it and look in. But in terms of actual active usage of the space, they don't have that. They don't have that access. And so this tension between the management of nature, the support for nature, the encouragement of nature, and access to nature is a really important one. And we've talked about it today. We can't predispose any discussion in terms of the sink. But I think we're having the right discussion. And in particular, I think the question of access to green space is an incredibly important one. And so I think that the concept of ensuring that that is embedded and managed for the long term is a very important one. So ultimately, we're not making the planning decision. And there will be, I'm sure, elements of what comes forward in the final application that may be different from what we've had today. But I think we've surfaced the issues. I think those issues will be explored further during the planning process. And ultimately, I was talking to the press and I said there were questions we had to answer. Has the proposal, is it properly thought through? Has there been enough consultation? Are we looking at a journey towards creating a place that will benefit our city, benefit Littleton, deal with the pressure of extra traffic, improve access to nature, and really importantly, be a good place to live for the new residents of our city and district. So the final decision on planning is going to come later. Our decision today is, do we think it's going in the right direction, making the right choices, and raising the right issues, which will be resolved later in the process? I think it is. I'm confident that the decision is not premature, that actually encouraging the early engagement and making these early decisions about principle and direction are helpful. And so I will also be supporting the paper that's in front of us today. There are still decisions to be made. It will be really important to get the details of the nature management right. There are other topics, the traffic and transport, which are important to people, where the more detailed studies will be coming later to help inform the outline decision. But what we're asked to do today is to agree an outline master plan. I feel confident, our concept master plan, sorry. I feel confident that we can do that. So, Cabinet, we have 3 recommendations in front of us. The first is to note the concept master plan process, including the public engagement strategy undertaken by the applicants, which to inform the concept master plan, and to confirm that it's been undertaken following the master planning process. And I think we've even possibly gone beyond that in our discussions today. We're asked to endorse the Sir John Moore Barracks concept master plan vision document attached as Appendix 1. And we've talked about how that will then become a material consideration to inform the development management assessment of the future planning application. And finally, so that we're very clear, this is a really important issue, but we are not taking a decision today on whether the candidate site of importance for nature conservation will be agreed. And that will be done as it should be, following a careful assessment and consideration of the future outline planning application. Cabinet, do you agree with those recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to the next item of business, which is the local development scheme. And thank you very much indeed to everybody who came forward to speak
very much
on this issue. We now move on to the telling the world what's going on. We're now moving on to the local development scheme. And I can see that Mr. Fox has come forward. Councillor Porter, would you like to introduce that paper, please?
Thank you to the team that have just moved on. That's planning in reality. This is planning for the future. And the local development scheme is a management plan which allows the team, the strategic planning team, to construct the building blocks of the local plan. And so today I'm bringing to Cabinet the interim local development scheme for approval, and I'm going to be asking for the word interim to be added into the decisions today. So the LDS is the project management plan to construct the building blocks of the local plan, but it is not the local plan itself. The council has a statutory duty under the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004 as amended to prepare and maintain an up-to-date local development scheme. The scheme is published on the council's website so that the public can follow the process of the local plan and the progress of it and see due consultations and decisions and where they can be involved. Having an up-to-date local development scheme is one of the key soundness tests at a local plan examination. It provides the information so that the interested public and developers track the progress of the local plan and that the inspector can see that that's the case. Some things happened. I don't know what's happened. In paragraph 11.3, it states that the interim LDS must specify, amongst other matters, the development plan documents which when prepared will comprise the local plan. So why am I asking for the word interim? Well, planning is changing. The Levelling Up and Regeneration Act will dictate the information required to compile a local plan and the timescale of its production, but as yet these are not specified. And you can see a list of, the public can see a list of those at paragraphs 11.6 to 11.45. And key dates are also there at 11.45, page 77. This is, of course, subject to the timetable for local government reorganisation. The scheme leads to the adoption of the next local plan in Q4 of the 27-28 fiscal year. So we're being very ambitious in that adoption of that next local plan. Today, our strategic planning department is required to produce a scheme to develop not the plan for which we're submitting the Reg 22 submission, new plan local 2040, but the next local plan. So I'll be referring to the local plan 2040, which is the plan currently awaiting public inspection, and the next local plan, which is the one after that. I'd just like, if it's possible, to start my or to finish my section by just saying to Adrian, if he would mind explaining in the new local plan 2040, we state clearly that we will start the next local plan within 6 months of the proposal. Can you outline, Mr. Fox, why we are preparing a local development scheme for the next local plan so early in that cycle and before the inspector has carried out the hearings on the new local plan 2040? I wanted to call them Plan A and Plan B, but apparently that's not acceptable. So we're talking about the new local plan 2040 and the next local plan, which will follow that. Could you explain that to the public, please?
Thank you, Councillor Porter. A really good question. In normal circumstances, to be perfectly honest with you, I wouldn't be coming at this moment in time with an LDS because clearly, obviously, the examination hasn't taken place. We're in a great deal of flux, if I can put it that, with obviously changes around us. I thought long and hard about how to prepare this report. And in the end, I decided to put in all the variables, and there are 9 of those in those reports. We are basically requested by the Chief Planning Officer to agree an LDS by the 9th of March. So that's hence what's triggered the need for this report. We don't have a choice. I was on a call with the Planning Officers Society in the Ministry in January, where there was 560 planners on the call, and they all said exactly the same thing. How can we prepare an LDS when we don't know what the new kind of way to prepare a local plan is? And the answer from the Ministry was, base it on the best information that you have at this moment, which is exactly the process I've done. And it is obviously the most information that I've got at the moment, including all those variables that are circling around us. So it's our best possible timetable at this moment in time. But like I say, under normal circumstances, I wouldn't be taking your time now to basically agree an LDS when basically there is uncertainty about a number of things. But we are requested by the Chief Planning Officer to prepare the LDS. If we don't prepare an LDS, the Ministry will step in and produce an LDS and a plan for us. Thank you.
Continue, please. Sorry, my computer's just decided to update, which is a little bit frustrating, so I'm going to be using my phone for the moment. So the key dates really are that the examination of the current new local plan 2040 is in Q1, April to June 2025, and then the consultation on the proposed modifications to that plan will be the end of Q1 and Q2 in 2025, and then we'll be commencing work on the review of the next local plan in July to September 2025. So it's it continues straight on. And that works towards the examination of the next local plan, Q4, January to March 2028, with the adoption following that. So it's very clear that that process is going at speed, but the requirements of it are at this point not confirmed, which is why I'd like to use the word interim in the recommendation, please.
Thank you very much indeed, and I'll make sure that we add that to the recommendation. So we have 2 councillors who wish to say a few words. Councillor Lee, would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Chair. Committee. I thought I'd paraphrase the opening words from the land consultation 2025, which says, "Our land is our greatest natural asset, the bedrock of nature, the support system of our environment we all rely on. It's central to our future, and we need to get the planning process right." I mean, obviously, it's important that the foundation to a resilient growth is a key part of that. And I agree with Councillor Porter, producing a sound local plan is probably a major priority for this council, yet it's against a shifting national planning legislation background, devolution, local government reorganisation, which presents some massive challenges. So my primary concerns are about flexibility and how adaptable are the timetables in the local plan preparation to respond to these local authority reforms and policy changes. With the Strategic Combined Authority Mayor elected in 2026 and a national 10-year infrastructure strategy about to emerge with key transport, energy and housing decisions, it remains unclear. It will remain unclear for some time how these will be played out. So how can we be constructing a plan without knowing these essential components? And I would like to try and understand what the approach might be there. The local development schedule process includes obviously an infrastructure delivery plan with the new mayor in 2026, the shadow unitary in 2027, and it risks public consultation happening in a changing planning environment and being overseen by shifting governance structures. This also raises concerns about democratic continuity and coordination with other district councils in what might be a potential mid-Hampshire unitary setup. So to avoid inefficiencies and unnecessary costs, how do we ensure alignment and avoid redundant efforts across multiple local plans? What's our thoughts on that? Additionally, the reliance on temporary staff, which is highlighted in the paper, to maintain the local plan development schedule timeline is worrying, given the difficulty which is stated in sourcing experienced planners. Could early shared resources with neighbouring districts mitigate this risk, especially if our local plan development process overlaps or aligns? Do we know where the other district authorities are on that local development schedule timelines? Surely this should be part of this cabinet paper for our consideration and oversight. The 425k from the major investment reserve to the local development reserve, is this going to be sufficient to cover the aforementioned challenges? And finally, I wonder if the new national planning policy framework might just allow a lighter touch local plan review rather than a full overhaul, given the recent evidence base work we've done for the emerging 2040 plan. So I'm not sure that do we need to do the full Monty, as I call it. Much of the evidence base may require evolution rather than reinvention or revolution, given these recent constructs. Of course, this is dependent on obviously legislation uncertainties, which will unfold, no doubt. So has this option been considered? So in general, I support this need, obviously, for the local development schedule, and I would appreciate the Cabinet's thoughts on these risks and whether changes are needed for more financial prudence, coordination, and overall feasibility of delivery, given some of these testing challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you for allowing me to address Cabinet again this morning. And I understand completely that we have a legal obligation to produce a local development scheme for the council and for onward submission to government against what is clearly an aggressive timetable. Can I ask, though, what new actions we will be taking as part of this LDS, as we need to take into account the devolution and local government reorganisation activities that we're now engaged in? Particularly as I understand the elected mayor in May 26 will have strategic planning responsibility. So in the timeline of the LDS before us this morning. As we are beginning the next plan before the current submission, and whatever terminology we're giving them all, has been examined, will we be able to use any of the documentation prepared for the current Regulation 19 submission, as it has only recently been prepared? I understand we're also having to have an element in the next plan regarding employment, and ask how are we going to approach this economic vision, given in the current proposal, Bushfield Camp is our only major employment site and yet to make it through the planning system. Also, with the number of additional houses required by government in the next plan iteration, substantially more employment opportunities will be needed. What work would the council be undertaking for this important requirement to inform the next plan? Will the LDS in any way protect us against speculative developers trying to push forward highly inappropriate new schemes, such as Lanham Lane, which is not in the carefully prepared local plan before the inspector? Are we going to have a developer free-for-all because of our higher housing numbers that we have been given by government? And can you confirm that we are fulfilling the requirement to produce can you confirm that by fulfilling the requirement to produce an LDS, there are so many moving parts that inevitably some of this is going to change as we move forward? And I welcome the word interim that Councillor Porter just made in her introduction, which I think at least acknowledges those moving parts. Can Cabinet confirm that if significant changes are made, that you will return to members the updated document for consideration, either via the Local Plan Cabinet Committee or this committee? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Horrell. Councillor Porter, do you want to respond to the points that you made?
Yes, please, and I may call Mr Fox into some of those answers if I may. Councillor Lee, I agree, our land is our greatest natural asset, and we are very concerned that year on year this will be a problem, but we also do need to produce housing and we need to produce it carefully. So yes, I completely agree. You talked about alignment and multiple efforts. Yes, the City Council works with other councils and through the whole gamut of the national park as well as in our own district. So yes, there is strong alignment. But at the end of the day, this is a land-based plan, and we know the land that Winchester District Council occupies, and so we can get started on that work with confidence. If it ending up in a different arrangement, then that's what happens. But all authorities know they're in that similar situation. And Mr Todders, or Councillor Todders, as chairman of the leaders, will be able to make sure that is part of that process. You asked about £425,000. Is it sufficient sum? In fact, more has been allocated in the budget, which is a separate paper. So yes, we are aware of that. You asked about whether there should be a lighter touch. And I think Councillor Horrell asked the same thing. That's for us to have a look at when we see any changes that will be provided. But I'm going to ask Mr Fox to talk about that in a little while. And as I mentioned, land planning. Councillor Horrell, yes, it is a legal obligation, and we've all been told we've got to have them by March the 7th. So that's end of conversation, really. Yes, we are having conversations about actions. In fact, Councillor Thompson and I were talking about this only yesterday, about the economy and the possible process we're going to need, or the process we will need, not possibly need, we will need in order to have the confidence about the economic future, because it's a very important part of the policy. And although we've only recently done yet another one, I think the movement, the whole country is changing, and we do need to do that again. In the timeline of the LDS, will we be able to use the current documentation? I'm going to again ask Mr Fox to talk about that. I think we've covered the employment one. The other thing is, will the LDS protect us from development? Well, having one certainly adds to the soundness of our plan. which is what we want to do. And as you know, it's a very important part of the process for this council, of whatever political persuasion, to have an up-to-date local plan so that we do protect ourselves from development. And can Cabinet confirm that if significant changes will be made? Absolutely. It's very important that we share the risks and challenges of this with the whole council, and we'll continue to do that. So I'm just going to go back really to Mr. Fox regarding the timeline about current documentation, and asking really about alignment with other authorities, and the matter of how we actually tackle this, not knowing at this point in time exactly what will be required.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Well, perhaps if we start by the issue of how fixed this timetable is. I will actually refer you to paragraph 35 of the PPG, because if I can just read this out, it explains that an LDS is expected to be reviewed and updated annually, but may need updating more frequently if there are significant changes. That's what the PPG says. Now, we do that each year by the authority's monitoring report. So each year, my team basically review the existing policies in the adopted local plan, and basically we work out whether or not the plan is effective. That is the mechanism to obviously signify that we need to change the timetable for the local plan. So we do that annually anyway, and yes, it would need to come back. In terms of the word interim, just to clarify, obviously that that was in the FAQs from basically the ministry, the event that I attended with the other officers from around the country. And they said basically, in their view, basically, you may want to say in your LDS and add the word interim timetable, and will be subject to review when details of new systems are published. And that's their caveat to basically say, we accept that we don't know everything at the moment. So that is their recommendation. It doesn't undermine the LDS. It's basically just acknowledging that basically the world is changing around us, and adds that flexibility that obviously both councils have picked up in their questions. So in terms of obviously not knowing all the ingredients, put my hand up. I don't know all the ingredients yet, and I don't know how it's going to change, but this is our best obviously plan at the moment based on the information that we have. We do want to use obviously all the good information that we gathered from this local plan that we're currently working on, and we will be using that evidence base and obviously supplementing that where we need to. It was brought up about employment. That's a new requirement in the NPPF. I've referred to it in the Cabinet report that we need to look at obviously by sectors. So that's a new requirement that certainly we need to look at. Interestingly, obviously, there's a lot of talk obviously about the housing numbers, understandably, but not much talk about how you need to match obviously the housing with employment, which is a really important issue in my mind, and basically understated at the moment. Again, hopefully there'll be more guidance on that, but it is important. So ultimately we will have to rerun our employment forecasts, and they are only forecasts. In terms of obviously sharing resources, we do obviously work with our colleagues, and we've got experience of obviously sharing obviously the cost of appointing consultants to do various commissions from the push work particularly. We're talking to our neighbours at the moment in the South Downs National Park about a joint piece of work, and obviously how we can obviously share and be obviously prudent with money. Just to clarify, the £420,000 is from obviously on the budget paper. There is some money still left in the pot from this local plan, which will basically be supplemented by that additional amount. And we do receive a capital injection each year, basically from the central fund to support the local plan kind of work. So obviously a lot of it comes down to we are waiting for the LURA in terms of how we need to produce a local plan. And obviously, can we take a light touch? Can we just focus on obviously the housing element and the employment element? Do we need to revise obviously the whole local plan? But hopefully, obviously, if the local plan policies have been successfully through examination, we can take that light touch, but we are waiting on further information. And obviously, the quicker we get on with the next local plan, hopefully the best situation will be that we can maintain a 5-year housing land supply. And that's why we're keen to obviously start work on it. We are monitoring obviously our neighbours, talking to our neighbours about where they are. They're all going to their cabinet. Basingstoke and Dean went to cabinet last night on their LDS. they're having to go straight back to Reg 18 local plan because basically their numbers have increased dramatically. So I think they're another two and a half years off basically bringing forward a plan, which is not the situation we want, because obviously there's some good policies in this plan that we want to bring forward now. So I hope that answers the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fox.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. Cabinet colleagues, do you have any questions in addition to the ones that have been asked? It is a staggeringly comprehensive paper, but Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, it was really around that employment needs assessment, which I know we carried out a number of times for the emerging local plan, or whatever we're calling it. I hear what you say, because everything's up in the air at the moment. We really don't know whether we'll just do a light touch, but given the next local plan, we'll be looking even further into the future. In your opinion, do you think we will need to do a comprehensive employment needs assessment again?
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. A really good question. I suspect we probably will. What we'd need to do is talk to our employment consultants, and obviously, like I say, hopefully there'll be further information on it. I say it was kind of put in, I think, quite silently in the NPPF, this new requirement about typologies and things like that, and actually understanding what that actually means in the practicalities of it. So I think we'd like to talk to our Lambeth Smith and Hampton, our employment consultants, about that. They may well have some views, but I suspect we probably will, because again, we will need to look forward over a longer period of time. But they are, as you recall, when we had the presentation from them, they are forecasts, and it's very difficult with employment to kind of forecast. There were, obviously, if you recall, 3 different scenarios, and in the end we picked the one in the middle. So it is very challenging in terms of employment, more challenging, I think, than housing, to try and predict that need. But yes, we will take that up with our employment consultants.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any debate? Councillor Porter, any final thoughts?
I think we have the AMR, the Authority Monitoring Report every year, and we have been providing housing above our requirement. We do know that if we act really positively about the local development scheme, we can make sure the project as it is moves forward in a very determined manner. And I really appreciate Mr. Fox and the team outlining the challenges we've got, because we can face each one by one, but we can also ensure that we keep the project moving on. It is particularly important as we move to different, potentially a local government reorganisation, that we keep our mind on the job. And we as a team know, and as a council know, exactly what that work is. So actually to have a timetable to do that, I think is a really positive move for us. It will keep everybody's focus in the right direction. And that's why I'm very happy to support the principle of the interim local development scheme.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, I agree with you. Now, obviously, the decision to have a local development scheme is a fairly easy one when the government has told us to do it. But I think it is very helpful that we have this clarity to say we will deliver the 2040 local plan by the end of this calendar year. That is the timetable we're working to, and we have a vision for how we could deliver the next new local plan by March 2028, and that's very useful to know. But as others have highlighted, and as indeed the paper highlights, there is uncertainty. We don't know when the detailed rules for the local plan will be put in place. I can say from other meetings that the work to define the work programme and the structures of the new combined authority is at a fairly early stage. But one of the agreements that has been made is that there are district chief executives involved in the planning group for that. And I think one of the things that all leaders have been very clear about is that we will want to achieve some kind of early clarity about the process for delivering a spatial development strategy for Hampshire and the Solent, and how that interacts with our local plan. But I think the other clarification that Mr. Fox has made that has been incredibly helpful is just to say that this is not a document that we agree and then forget about and don't see for 5 years. It is one that as a minimum needs to be updated every year. And I think it's absolutely clear that when we know things like the likely timetable for spatial development, strategy development by the combined authority, when we have had the regulations that define the local planning process under the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, or defined and agreed, that we will see this again. That's clear, implicit part of the process, and I think helpful for us to understand. So I would like to thank Mr. Fox and his team for an astonishingly detailed and thorough piece of work. Many congratulations to you and for the quality of paper that you've brought to us. The government is going to be, I'm sure, absolutely delighted and impressed by the work of Winchester City Council on this particular project, and the recommendations, and we are as well. So on that basis, I think we're in a position, well, certainly I am, I can't speak for the rest of Cabinet. We have 2 recommendations: that the updated, we'll decide where to put the interim, but Winchester District Local Development Scheme, February 2025, brackets, interim, close brackets, as set out in Appendix 1 to this report, be approved and brought into immediate effect. And that authority is delegated to the Strategic Planning Manager in consultation with the Cabinet Member for placing the local plan to undertake minor updating and drafting of any amendments required prior to publication, which will presumably include appropriate insertion of the word interim wherever needed. Those are the 2 recommendations. Are they agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for the work that's been done.
Mr. John wants to speak.
For a new amended appendix to come up for the next item, so you might want to consider.
I will do that then. Right, we're going to slightly change the order now in order to keep moving ahead. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for that.
Thanks to the team. Thank you.
Would people, do you think we have a break?
It's 2 hours.
Yeah, I think we may just have a quick, my watch is telling me that I need to get up and stretch my legs. So we will take a 5-minute break, I think, for people to just, and then, so we'll adjourn for 5 minutes and be back. Yeah, and then we will Thank you very much indeed, and welcome back to the meeting. We now have the discussion of the general fund budget for next financial year. Deputy Leader, would you like to introduce the paper?
Thank you, Leader. This budget paper has been prepared based on the MTFS and budget options presented to this committee in November. However, at the time, government financial settlement was not known, and so a series of assumptions had been made. We are now far clearer about the settlement, and there are a number of significant changes set out in points 11.7 and 11.8, resulting in approximately £230,000 reduction on our forecast. Additionally, the compensation for the rise in employers' national insurance, calculated to be costing in the region of £500,000 across both the HRA and the general fund, shows a shortfall of £300,000. We are only going to be financed by government to the tune of around about 200,000 for that. However, we're also clearer on the level of extended producer responsibility funding, which now comes in at £834,000 annually. Other baseline figures updated since November are the forecast surplus of 1.46 million on the 24-25 figure. Just over £1 million of that is the release of surplus non-domestic rates. And we also have TC25 savings that have increased from the 250,000 in the previous paper to 662,000, giving a total of 1.3 million over across 2 years. The updated MTFS now shows a balanced budget for 25-26 and 26-27 with a 1.197 million deficit in 27-28, rising to 4.59 in 29-30. Section 14 deals with the changes in budget proposals since the draft, including the proposed increase district council tax by 2.7%, an increase of £4.30 on Band D properties. We are proposing changes to the council tax reduction scheme, which uprates the scheme in line with the universal benefit increases, and also to increase support to various groups by increasing the disregards within the scheme. This can be found at 18.5 in the paper. We also propose an additional £15,000 to the exceptional hardship fund to replenish it to its original level of £50,000. Following last year's reduction of the time after which a council tax premium is payable on empty homes, we propose to give notice from April 2026, 100% premium will also apply to second homes. A key part of the paper includes a review of our reserves, and we propose significant transfers from two risk reserves, the transition reserve and the exceptional inflation reserve, to top up operational reserves, particularly the property and car park reserves, and also £200,000 additional resources to be allocated to planning enforcement. You'll see from the recommendations that we're committing significant sums to our council plan priorities, particularly greener faster, with the implementation of food waste collection and Good Homes for All, additional investment in temporary homes. The paper was scrutinised at the scrutiny committee last week, and there were a number of questions. One of the which I can go through now and deal with: the use of the property portfolio to drive additional income. There was a question on that. That is a key part of TC25 proposals. There were questions about investment in the parking reserve, and I did point out that actually at the last cabinet, we agreed the detail of that, and that is publicly available, even though several members of scrutiny didn't seem to have noticed the fact. There was a question about financing the food waste service for the 6 months beforehand, because the consultation hadn't mentioned it, but I responded that we had agreed that on the basis of effective implementation, and we're planning to fund that. And in fact, the extended producer responsibility funding certainly helps towards that. And there was some questions about turbocharging the TC25 programme. We're looking at that in the context of devolution and what we can do more. But obviously the figures as they stand with the deficit in 28-29, significant deficit, mean we need to continue with the TC25 programme. And there are also questions about community infrastructure levy, particularly in the context of local government reorganisation, and the question about where the interest on SIL funds are, which basically becomes part of our broader income. So those were the main queries at scrutiny. There are a couple of amendments to the paper. We've tabled this supplementary agenda. This is simply because the Appendix C had not been updated to include the £200,000 for planning enforcement, and that's now in under the Thriving Places, and also the titles for the reserves hadn't been changed to reflect the local plan. And there is also a change to the recommendation, the very final recommendation, which will now read that decisions will be taken in consultation with the relevant cabinet member, because both A and B are for different cabinet members. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Before we do that, I have Councillor Lee and Councillor Godfrey. Councillor Lee, would you like to come forward and make your comments?
Thank you, Leader. I'd like to thank Councillor Cutler and the finance team for the Monday's budget updates, which provided valuable opportunity to explore ongoing financial challenges. That was most welcome. Thank you. Despite national and local financial pressures, it's reassuring to see that Winchester City Council has a reasonably stable short-term budget, but of course with deficits projected from 2027-28 going forward. I welcomed the restated commitment to core services for 25 and 26 and the enhanced delivery of the new council plan. The transformation challenge 2025 is also encouraging, but I have some questions. What impact will the identified savings have on service quality? While I assume this was carefully considered before implementing these savings, there must be some effect. I have one specific question with respect to the emergency planning management arrangements. Obviously, any diminution of services and support for community emergencies would be unwelcome. In terms of the Devo local government reorganisation, will obviously, of course, bring significant resourcing challenges, and we've recognised that. The Grant Thornton Learning from the New Unitary Council's report doesn't seem to be referenced, unless I've missed it. Has this been reviewed, or is there a plan to do this? The report highlights escalating transformation costs, so should we not draw on lessons from recent local government experiences to prepare for our future financial pressures now? And particularly, as I understand, there will be no new money from central government. I strongly welcome the 200k additional enforcement funding, particularly given the high enforcement caseload in my ward in Central Meon Valley, which I raised at full council last year. So can I ask what has prompted this decision, which as I say is welcome? Has there been an unexpected additional rise in cases across the district? And also in response to the full council question, there was a suggestion that some of the issues were tied to the Environment Agency and county enforcement, not perhaps being proactive. And of course, a concern that I would have is that hopefully we're not going to be funding their shortfalls. I fully support the increased social support proposals, and as an accident advice advisor, these lifelines I know are essential. So I welcome the revised income bands for the council tax reduction scheme, the extended council tax exceptional hardship fund, and the 300k per annum for temporary accommodation to prevent homelessness. But I do wonder how sustainable these provisions are going to be beyond this financial year without addressing the root cause of cost of living issues. Another concern is the funding gap, which has been highlighted by Councillor Cutler, and that's the national insurance contributions. And also was mentioned as the contractor cost increases. So can I ask, I'm sure it's been done, but for clarification, please, have we received projected cost estimates from our contractors with respect to the ongoing costs from the national insurance impacts, and are these fully accounted for in our budget? And if contractors aren't going to absorb these costs, will these impact our service quality? And finally, I welcome the 200k per year for carbon program delivery. But I note, unless again I've missed it, this doesn't seem to be a provision for the nature improvement program. Is that hidden, or perhaps you can clarify, please? And given the interlinked and interdependentness of the climate and nature crises, addressing carbon isolation, as I suggest, is like boxing with one hand tied behind our backs. Is it possible to reconsider this if it is an emission? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Godfrey, did you want to make some comments?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So the uncertainty continues. There have been no significant changes to the overall settlement structure this year. New homes bonus continues, hurrah. The reset of a business rates income has been delayed again, hurrah. The only significant change is that the cliff edge that this council has faced for many years is now certain to happen in the next couple of years, and we can't put it off. Like Councillor Lee, I commend the additional spending on planning enforcement, a measure that I and many other ward councillors have, particularly those in rural wards, have been calling for many years. And I think it will be a burden that will continue to grow as we do more planning over the next few years. I do hope that there will be sufficient funding available, as was noted in the previous paper, to allow sufficient budget for the increased burden faced by the council to meet the needs of strategic planning. I think that is something which we will need to specify in this and future budgets. However, this budget shows how fortunate Winchester City Council finances has been for the last dozen or so years in its short-term funding. The uncertainty of a council's funding in the longer term, however, has led to strategic budget review, the TC25, which has started some 3 years ago. Steady progress is reported as being made with, in this paper, it's up to £1.3 million per annum improvements to the general fund. And obviously, such improvements are welcome. I'm a bit concerned by some of the improvements, but when you dig in, they seem to be a bit flaky, such as the reported increase this year in £76,000 per annum in additional planning income claimed in the paper. While just a page above in this paper has to be offset against the £200,000 a year in reduced planning fee income. So I'm not sure if the officers have been entirely clear and open about why they need more or less money. During the last 3 years, while central government funding has continued to flow in largely unchanged, inflation and other increases to council expenditure have created even greater pressures on council finances in the medium term. Does the Cabinet have sufficiently robust plans to address the growing shortfall?
Thank you very much indeed. Deputy Leader, would you like to respond to the points raised?
Thank you, Leader. I think that Councillor Lee's first question really was whether TC25 has actually resulted in a deterioration of services. I think you, as you said, you were at the briefing on Monday, and to date we have not we have managed to find the savings without affecting services to it. In fact, we've in some cases improved services. So there are some things that have come out of TC25 that have not saved money but have improved services. So at this point, part of the process of TC25 is to try to minimise the effect on services. There will be some things that we will decide not to do at some point in this process. And in fact, the reduced pest control would be one area where we reduce the amount that we do. But the effect on services, I don't think, has been significant. You talked about also asked questions about local government reorganisation, and that, undoubtedly that is an area that we in this budget can't really recognise what the costs will be, but it is something we'll be working on through this year as to where we have to. For example, one of the things will be the governance review will have a cost, but we do have those risk reserves which initially were there for the TC25 programme and for the longer term deficits cover if we hadn't made the savings. I think the transition reserve is well named and can also be used to a certain extent to cover some of those costs. But obviously, as those costs develop, we will have to look again at the budget. In terms of contract costs, I'll ask Mrs. Keys if she's got any intelligence on the figures on contract costs and whether the national insurance is being passed on by our contractors.
Yes, thank you. We're doing a review of all of the contracts which might be affected by this, but assessing it on a case-by-case basis. Clearly, there are clauses in contracts about which pressures suppliers might be able to pass on to the council. So we're in conversation where it's necessary.
And I think the other comment was on the greener, faster priorities, particularly that funding for carbon reduction, which is part of the budget of the team that look at both at the carbon reduction and on the nature side of things. So it is a budget that covers both areas. But I take your point. I have not received a request for any further funding on that. I think both welcomed the planning enforcement funding. That's not based on an increase in the number of cases. It's the fact that there is a backlog of cases that existed pre-COVID, that your ward and my ward, Councillor Lee, both suffer from a significant number of those being very old cases, and Councillor Porter requested that we had the funding to attempt to deal with some of those older cases and reduce that load, and that's the process. But I think Councillor Porter could speak, might wish to speak a little more on that. The question on sufficient funding for strategic planning, again, our reserves for sort of the allocation within reserves for this year is definitely sufficient, but we continue to obviously review the reserves position and allocations through the year, and I'm sure if there is a further request on that side of things, we will consider it. Councillor Godfrey talked about the changes to government funding. I mean, it is definitely the case where he is correct. For the last, certainly for the 5-6 years that I've been involved with this, every year we've had to plan on the basis that there would be the fair funding review the following year. This year, the indications are a lot stronger. Just the elements that have been abolished in this year's settlement. Yes, they continue with New Homes Bonus, but it will be on a different basis in the future, and we will experience significant cuts, and the rates review is almost certain to happen. I think the key aspect of it is the fact that the government have indicated that their settlements will be on the basis of need, not on a sort of formulaic approach that there is now. And it will be very, very difficult to argue that Winchester has greater need than other parts of the country.
Thank you. Any other questions from Cabinet colleagues? Or other issues that think need clarification? I mean, obviously we've all been actively involved in the development of this paper. Any debate? Councillor Porter.
I'd just like to expand on some of the points that Councillor Cutler just raised. I would have, you had a very important announcement to make at the beginning, but one of the other announcements that is available is that we have just sent out our local enforcement plan out for consultation back out to the public. This has been as a result of quite a lot of work in the last year or so, working on improving the enforcement plan that we currently have. It's gone out to consultation, it's on Winchester Citizen Space, and it's open until the 20th of March. We have a very full team of enforcement officers doing a very good job, but the number of enforcement cases they're dealing with keeps up with what's currently going. And we identified that there were a number of enforcement cases, a large number between 2016 and 2021, which was included that end of the COVID years, but before that time, before my time, that still sit there, that once they're reported, they can't be taken off the list until they're investigated. And that meant that the number, although we're keeping up with the stuff that's coming in at the moment, the backlog was still sitting there, hundreds on the list. And we wanted to get those lists to be much slimmer so that we can see what's going on, and also make sure that we are tackling them in a timely manner then from then on. So that's why we asked for this this extra money, and I'm really pleased that it's been granted, because it is about thriving places. One of the two things really that we want to do is we want to make sure that the harm of reported breaches and how best to address those local concerns through the prioritisation of enforcement investigations is done. So the local plan review of that, the local enforcement plan review, gives us the opportunity to look again at that and see what the public think. But we know that you just hate having a list that's just got lots of things on that are old and not touched. So this is specifically about getting back to that backlog and dealing with it.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. It's a useful perspective. Any other comments? Councillor Cutler, any final thoughts?
I don't really have anything to add, having gone into the detail probably to a greater extent than I sometimes do. The only point would be that the appendix, I think you mentioned the appendix and the changes to the I can't remember if you announced them publicly or not. Oh, I did. Right. Okay. So I won't repeat myself. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for all the work that's been done to bring this paper forward. Thank you to the officers, because I know there's a huge amount of work that goes right across the organisation to get to this particular point. It's good to see that we continue to have sound finances, although the reality of the change to the settlement that's coming our way means that, you know, we do have challenges ahead in terms of the TC25 programme to make sure it delivers the savings that will be needed, particularly in the context of the complexity of local government reorganisation at the same time. However, despite that, I'm pleased that we are making improvements in terms of investments, in terms of our programme, the food waste collection service, revised council tax reduction scheme, the council tax exceptional hardship fund, extra support for temporary accommodation. That's an incredibly important area. It's an area that's actually of great interest and discussion in the context of local government reorganisation. It's an area where we've been performing very well. but there are extra pressures. You know, it is a one-way ratchet in terms of the pressure that's coming our way, and some of the changes that have been made to legislation for private rental accommodation are adding to the pressure of that. There is the issue that national insurance increased costs and other increased costs have not been fully covered by the government. But we are still managing to make improvements. We are investing in planning enforcement. We've talked about that. We're investing in our buildings and our car parks to ensure that the assets we have are in a good shape, and that we end up spending effectively in advance of crisis rather than spending huge amounts on crisis if you leave things too long. So we have a whole set of recommendations. Some of these are recommendations we're making to full council. So agreeing the general fund budget as shown in Appendix A, approving the greener, faster and carbon investment proposals, revising council tax bands, the council tax reduction scheme and funding the council tax exceptional hardship fund, extra spending on temporary accommodation to prevent homelessness, another 3 extra pressure on the financial on council contracts, some adjustments to the budgets as laid out in recommendation 6, a review of reserves, including that extra investment in planning enforcement that we've all talked about, but also the extra cost, for example, of an accelerated local plan process. We're then asked to agree the recommendation as far as the town forum area is concerned, and the increase there, and the council tax figure, an increase of £4.30, which at least based on the ones I've seen across other districts that have published their paper is the lowest in Hampshire, and the approval of a second home premium for council tax to take effect from April 2026, which is actually, people have talked about preparation for unitarisation. That is a good example where actually all the councils in Hampshire getting into the same policy in terms of how they handle that kind of council tax change is a useful thing to be doing. We then have the specific recommendations that relate to Cabinet alone approving, which is delegation of authority to the corporate head of economy community in consultation with the relevant Cabinet member to devise and agree the Community Voluntary Sector Grant Programme and the UK Shared Prosperity Fund Programme. And I think that's it. Cabinet, are you agreed to those recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. The next paper is the housing revenue account. So, Councillor Westwood, would you like to bring that forward?
Thank you, Leader. Despite the continuing budget challenges of increased costs now baked in following a period of high inflation, interest rates that are higher than experienced over many decades and energy costs that remain significantly higher than historic levels, this report proposes a housing revenue account budget for 25-26 to achieve the Council's policy objectives to go greener, faster, address the cost of living crisis and maintain the commitment to deliver 1,000 new homes. We're very proud to have over 5,200 council homes in the Winchester district, but we also have around 1,600 people on the Hampshire Home Choice waiting list. The changed new home strategy agreed in last year's budget to move towards buying as well as building is paying dividends, and we can already see the route to deliver over 600 of these 1,000 additional homes. The HRA Capital Programme in this budget paper includes the provision for existing and emerging opportunities sufficient to finance the achievement of the Council's target to deliver 1,000 new council homes by 2032. As well as new homes, we need to modernise our existing homes. We are improving the quality of our existing homes, and the retrofit programme has already delivered benefits to over 500 council homes in our district. Funding to go greener faster has been maintained in the 25-26 budget to improve energy efficiency and promote decarbonisation of our council homes. The budget retains significant investment in retrofitting the stock, with proposals to combine the fabric upgrades with renewable energy technologies such as solar PV and battery storage that are vital to meeting our target EPCC in some of our more energy inefficient homes. The budget also makes provision for continuation of our major repairs programme to deliver refurbishment of our existing housing stock to maintain decent home standard. This includes important items such as roof replacement, upgraded doors and windows. This investment alongside our retrofit programme is delivering council homes that are warmer, more comfortable and cheaper to run. As well as providing new homes and maintaining our existing homes, housing is also a service, and our tenants want a modern, efficient service that's easy to use. We want the housing service to provide excellent customer service and be easy to deal with when our tenants have any sort of problem with their home. The budget includes funding to modernise the customer service offer through the development of a digital-first customer journey, improving communication and self-service options for tenants and residents, and efficiency of services. We will, of course, still maintain capability that allows those who don't choose to use the digital platform to continue using their housing services. The work will also include the reprocurement of the repairs and maintenance contract, which is due for renewal in 2026. To pay for the housing services, we need to ensure that we're making best use of our assets. We're moving to full cost recovery for housing service charges and water treatment service charges over a period so that these services are not subsidised by other council tenants. For housing service charges, we propose to cap the increases at 5% or £5 a week, whichever is the greater, and to phase towards full recovery over a period of years. The move to full cost recovery for water treatment is more complex, and the budget contains provision to invest in a number of water treatment plants to reduce operational costs, and also to consult fully through the first half of the next financial year and then move to full cost recovery for these services for all water treatment service users over a transitional period. And finally, I turn to rents. Increasing the rent for our social housing and affordable housing is always a difficult decision. The council sets its rents in line with the rent standard and the regulator's social housing's rent setting guidelines. The basis of rent setting is September CPI plus 1%, which for this budget period is proposed at 2.7% rent increase for all tenants. In line with previous years, the budget setting process and options for achieving a balanced budget were discussed with TACT, and the TACT board agreed the proposed rent increases at their board meeting on the 27th of January 2025. Despite the challenging circumstances we face, I believe it's a strong plan that addresses those circumstances whilst also improving and modernising our services and housing that we make available to current and future tenants who rely on them. So, Leader, before I finish, I'm going to make a few comments on the scrutiny meeting. Okay, so you have before you the minutes from the scrutiny meeting that took place last week. At that meeting, there were a number of questions asked on the paper, which are listed in the minutes there, and I believe those were answered during the meeting at that point. Scrutiny asked for the table concerning service charges at paragraph 1142 to be updated and annotated, and that has been circulated and is available in front of you. The scrutiny committee asked that the points raised regarding Corner House property were reviewed, and if required, further feedback for this committee. I don't believe that's the case. The budget in front of you contains a capital allocation for the Corner House. It is not permission to spend, and a paper for options moving forward will be brought to Cabinet at a later date there. I was also asked whether I considered any relevant feedback from the TAC board for this committee. So in that respect, I will just quickly run through the conversations that were taken in the TAC board that are relevant to this paper. In summary, there's nothing additional that I would wish to specifically pull out, but we did discuss the the proposals to close the funding gap that we needed to do in terms of cost savings in the budget, and we talked about a number of points that are in Appendix 7 of the document. We talked about the risk assessment that sits in the paper, and the officers explained that the budget paper contains the risks related to the budget, and that if there are specific risks such as those around meeting the new consumer standards requirements are dealt with, are sitting in the council's risk register and are dealt with in those specific papers. So in that respect, the regulator's social housing paper was taken through Cabinet Committee Housing last week, which had a full set of risk analysis on that paper in terms of that particular item. So I think that has been covered. At the TAC board, we also talked and took input from the TAC board members on the rent increase. The general discussion there was about the level of the rent increase. It was pointed out by some of our independent members that the CPI rate in September was pretty low. It's actually gone up again since September. There was general agreement by the TAC board that the rent setting at 2.7% was accepted when it was agreed. And there was also discussion on the consultation process for the rent increase. This consultation was in line with every other year that we've done in terms of engaging with the TAC committee, the TAC board in this case. But in addition, this year we did also circulate the information on the areas that we were looking to make savings within the HRA to over 4,000 of our tenants and asked for their opinions on that. We did get some responses back, but it's interesting to note that just under 60% of those emails that were sent out to 4,000 tenants were opened by those tenants, and that around about 8% of the 4,000 also clicked through to the survey, and it was a considerably smaller number that actually completed the survey at the end. So I'm absolutely delighted that this year we've consulted far more broadly than we have done in previous years. I think that is the end of the scrutiny comments. So just take this into account when we make our decision. Thank you.
Thank you for that very thorough introduction. We have two councillors who wish to make comments. I believe Councillor Lee first and then Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Leader. The recent 0.25% interest rate drop is a positive step for market sentiment and budgets, and I hope we all feel the benefits of that soon, including the housing budget. And well done, as I said, to the Housing Committee, the officers for playing three-dimensional chess with the challenges of this complex programme of work and the budget needs. No easy task. But I would like to add some thoughts to these dimensions, which I believe will have multiple benefits and potential spend to save aspects. And picking up on what you were saying earlier, Leader, it's important not to forget the nature emergency. So my key concerns will focus there. And for me, I believe there needs to be stronger environmental considerations in the HRA budget, particularly dovetailing with hopefully a district nature improvement plan. A holistic approach to nature, carbon, tenant wellbeing and budgets would create multiple benefits across all plans, not just for the HRA. And there's links across to the social support proposals and general fund as well. So we have a 30-year business plan that supports significant retrofit funding aiming to reduce 1,666 tonnes of carbon from homes by 2030. Well, that's great. But I think I could emphasise that we could perhaps do better by considering a bit more than just energy and carbon. A more holistic approach for the HRA with the benefits would be to consider green infrastructure and nature improvements. And I think this is well understood elsewhere. So some examples: energy efficiency and climate resilience. So, with cooling in summer, trees, green roofs, facades provide natural bio-shading, lowering energy costs. Warming in winter, evergreen trees and creepers as bio-warming act as windbreaks, reducing heat loss. And carbon reduction through vegetation absorption, and also reduces reliance on fossil fuels and manages rainwater water a growing problem. And then, of course, you add the boosting the biodiversity and tenant well-being, mental health, which we've mentioned. Creating habitats is important. Green roofs, hedgerows, green walls supports pollination and urban wildlife. And then supporting pollinators, more flowering plants sustains ecological needs, bees, birds, and strengthening food chains, etc. Improving urban resilience in terms of the green space to enhance air quality is important as well, to reduce flooding and improve well-being. So I think through holistic thinking, integrating green infrastructure and nature improvements, we lower tenants' energy costs, we enhance biodiversity, we accelerate decarbonisation. This delivers smarter, joined-up solutions for housing and nature plans and district benefit. And it'd be interesting to see with the current consultation for the standard assessment procedure, which is what drives EPC performance assessments, whether some of these items might be picked up on. And I think we would do well to start thinking about some of these win-win aspects. And perhaps even the retrofit officers that we're going to be funding could oversee some of these elements as part of a retrofit program, and even SO 106 new home acquisitions. Their expertise could easily be expanded to incorporate these critical measures through some light training. And finally, on a Pacific, I'd just like to ask, I'm sorry if I've missed it, will boiler replacements be funded with heat pumps at the end of their life? Replacements and installation, as we know, are expensive. Has this been fully factored into the HRA budget? And sorry if I have missed it. Thank you.
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you for allowing me to speak yet again this morning. And indeed, there's been a significant number of opportunities to review the HRA budget at the TAC Board, Cabinet Committee, Housing and Scrutiny. So many of the elements that I would have wanted to ask, I have already raised. But may I ask a question that I did raise at scrutiny, but it was not directly answered? And that is, it is my view that the risk assessment in this important paper doesn't reflect all of the issues that we have before us in the HRA. It focuses a lot on the new build programme, and I accept that that is a reasonable inclusion. But I feel it misses some of those crucial elements that are also impacting the service. We have referred ourselves to the housing regulator in an effort to try and move forward proactively and positively. And that's particularly against some of the practices that we have today, not necessarily that we don't do things, but the way that we do them. And I would have expected some of that to be more prominent in this risk assessment because that is material to the success of the housing team. And some other elements that we have discussed and I think are really positive steps, such as technology with the retrofit strategy. Again, we haven't had a proof of theory there yet, although I think we're all optimistic. So I just question whether we have done due diligence from a risk assessment point of view on such a significant part of the council's budget. Thank you for providing the detailed account of the housing services charges requested at scrutiny. Just getting the information this morning is a little difficult to do justice to understanding all of the charges, what they're for. They now have a much better descriptor, so thank you for that, and also the movement. However, I just wanted to clarify, because there were one or two looking at it quickly, that I wanted to reassure myself that I understood the process, because we're charging retrospectively, essentially, that the cost is incurred and then we sort of reclaim, as it were. And I just wanted to make sure that I'm interpreting the cost increases or decreases correctly against actual costs, because there are one or two here I thought, why are we decreasing it when actually our current actual cost is higher? And our forecast income therefore is going to be lower than the current actual. So should we actually be making a slightly different decision? That's at a detailed level, Chair, and I appreciate that this is not necessarily the right place to raise that, but it is the first time that I've seen this. And I think it just reminds us all that this whole process of scrutiny and the phasing of these decisions and information just makes it hard sometimes to process that data. My other question is, have we received the outcome of the LAFI grant application, which is important to the Barnes House decision and material to the HRA budget and temporary accommodation strategy? And I think we were hoping that we would have news, but it may be that we have not. And finally, Chair, my thought is around the housing team. And it is obvious that they're going through significant change in terms of their organisation and they've been doing that over previous months, but also going forward. And many policy introductions, some that we talked about at the policy committee last night, which was a really helpful discussion. And I just question the decision to hold back on training budgets, as we're not really dealing like for like with the housing team next year. We're asking them to do more, to understand a broader set of requirements. And I just want to ensure we give them the best chance to succeed by ensuring they're appropriately trained. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Leader. Yes. Picking up on Councillor Lee's questions, and I agree with everything you said about nature and using nature to alleviate some of the impact of the change that we're inevitably going to see. And the retrofit program itself, you've already seen it morph a little bit to take in newer technology. I would align that also to the consumer standard groups that we're really trying to get running properly to engage with our tenants more often and better everywhere across the district where we have council homes. And I'm looking for those groups to start bringing to us some of those areas where we can improve the nature around our properties to do exactly the sorts of things that you're talking about. So where we see that, there are trees in this particular place would provide shading in areas, then we can actually move forwards with those. And we have funding for estates improvement that we would look to use those. So I'm looking for the retrofit program itself to continue looking at new ways of providing better homes for our people going forwards, our tenants, but also I'm looking for the tenants to work with us to help on the environmental side in the specific areas where they live. So I see that's now taken forwards. Second, in terms of the boilers to heat pumps, the answer is no. There is no specific funding sitting in the HRA at this point in time to fund replacements of boilers with heat pumps, with all the associated work that's required on a property to enable heat pumps to function effectively. And we all know that there will be internal workings to be done on those homes. So the route forward for that is that we do need to go down that path. I have asked the officers to bring forward to Cabinet Committee a paper on council home decarbonisation, but we would need to drive that policy, whatever that policy turns out to be. we would need to understand how we would adequately finance that. Clearly, we're looking to the government where we can to get funding for decarbonising and moving away from fossil fuels over our housing stock. But that is the job that needs to be done. So we know what we want to do at the moment. The technology keeps moving, so we keep moving with it, but we need to align the funding alongside it. And bear in mind that 93% of our income into the HRA comes from our tenants' rents. Those rents are capped, quite rightly so, and so that is our major income to work with. But we also have clearly many demands on that money to maintain the existing housing stock and to provide new homes, where we do have borrowing clearly, for what is still a significant demand for new council homes across the district. So it's a bit of a balancing game. Your 3D chess, turn it into 4D chess, because we've got time frame going through it as well. Okay, thank you. Councillor Horrell, right, the risk assessment with apologies for repeating a little bit of my introduction as well. I'm going to restate the position again. It's a position that we stated a few times. So the risk section within the HRA budget paper relates to financial risk. You're talking about risks with the regulator of social housing. So the risks related to the housing service to meet the new consumer standards are known and are recorded in the council risk register. The housing service has completed a self-assessment against the new consumer standards on what would be required to meet them. A paper on the work required to meet those consumer standards was taken to Cabinet Committee Housing on the 3rd of February to inform the committee of the outcome and what we need to do to meet the consumer standards. Cabinet Committee Housing approved the proposed work plan to address the gaps and assess the risks based on a comprehensive risk analysis, including financial risks, that was in that paper. Work has already begun to work on those areas for improvement where there are gaps, and to meet the new consumer standards. And budgetary requirements to achieve those regulatory standards and requirements that were in that paper brought to Cabinet Committee on the 3rd of February have been fully built into this budget for 2025-26. In terms of retrofit, you made mention of the retrofit and the use of technology alongside fabric work and piloting and so on. And yes, the jury's still out on that, and we need to prove the point. And that is part of our plan to do that. But the retrofit strategy remains unchanged, and that is to achieve EPCC by 2030. And that approach will now include new technology alongside the current fabric first approach, and that was also presented at Cabinet Committee Housing on the 3rd of February. How the best strategy is best achieved will always be reviewed in light of the technology and the market options. And the retrofit strategy is always brought to Cabinet Committee Housing, where we receive a report including the required risk assessment of the approach to deliver the strategy as it evolves. And again, the budgetary requirements to deliver the new technology solutions alongside the fabric upgrades have already been built into the budget paper that's before you today. In terms of service costs, then and I know you and I sat down and looked through this as well in the office and gone through them. In answer to that specific question, some costs have gone down because they may relate to items such as energy, which was significantly higher in a previous period and is now lower. Therefore, we are taking into account the fact that energy costs have come down from their peak. They're still very high, but there is so we're taking that into account when calculating the charges going forwards. That's why some have come down when you'd expect them to go up. The grant for Barnes House, to my knowledge, we do not have that answer back yet. So Simon End is just nodding his head there. So we're still waiting for the outcome of our application for that grant as we sit here today. And in terms of the training budgets, then we went through a fairly comprehensive process this year of going through all of the budget lines within the HRA to ensure that they were at the correct level. The training budget has reduced, but it's not reduced below the level at which we believe we need to spend in the forthcoming year for the training. And you're quite right, there's some significant changes going on as we modernise the housing service, and that there will be significant elements of training for all of our staff across that service as we transition into a more customer focused organisation, as we staff the call centre, desk and so on in different ways with different skills. But I am assured that the training budget that is included in here is sufficient to cover our needs. We have just trimmed it back to a more realistic level than how it was presented in previous years. So I think that answers the questions.
Thank you very much indeed. And indeed, further to the point about how the risk relating to consumer standards and other such things are concerned, it's on page 150 of the report for those who want it, paragraphs 1132 to 1134, cost pressures related to that. Any other questions from Cabinet members? Any debate? Any final comments, Councillor Westwood?
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, we're at a point of inflection within the HRA and the housing service, and we are transitioning. And I'm delighted that with the budget paper that we brought forwards, we are able to continue building out new homes and addressing the new homes need that we've got across the district. We are significantly improving the stock that we've got, and we are transitioning this the service into a more customer focused and easier to do business with service. And we're also addressing the supplier contracts, bearing in mind that the virtual workforce working for the HRA far exceeds the number of people that sit within the council running the HRA. And so I'm very pleased with the budget that has been brought forward by the team here for the next financial year. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, indeed. And a huge thank you to you and to officers for all their work on this. It's great to still be in a position that we're bringing forward new council homes, cutting carbon and cutting bills for our tenants, but also thinking innovatively and bringing in new technological approaches to achieve that, looking to improve service. A lot of good things in this paper, and thank you to everybody who's been involved in making that happen. If we go through the recommendations in front of Cabinet today, we have a set of recommendations where we're recommending things to Council. We're noting the HRA financial plan, approving the HRA budget, approving the capital programme for maintenance, improvements and renewals over the long term, and then approving and delegating authority to the strategic director for the capital programme in 25-26. We're awarding a contract for technology-based retrofit works, which is great. We're approving a 10-year capital programme for new homes, approving the financing of the HRA capital programme as per Appendix 5, approving revenue savings as outlined to Cabinet in November, authorising the 151 officer in consultation with the strategic director to approve the buyback during 25-26 of individual HRA properties sold under the right to buy, following positive financial appraisal, utilising the new homes budget, which is good, and subject to acceptance of LAF funding, agreeing a set of steps to move ahead with accessing and spending that funding with a memorandum of understanding, approving the capital of expenditure, and improving the purchase of up to 12 properties. I know the buyback programme, particularly on the council estates, is very popular. Approving the rent increase, improving the amendment to HRA tenant service charges, noting the previous consultation on the move to full cost recovery for the council's sewage treatment works, and noting that the HRA business 30-year plan is viable, sustainable, and has the capacity to support the delivery of 1,000 new affordable homes. Cabinet, are you happy to agree that?
Agree.
Brilliant. Into the last stretch. The next paper is the capital investment strategy. Would you like to say a few words to introduce that? Deputy Leader.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. The capital strategy sets out the council's capital spending programme and more importantly the principles that underpin this in order to deliver the desired outcomes as set out in the council plan. It details the overall programme for the next 10 years, how it's financed, the governance around it, the appetite for risk, and the impact on the council's medium-term financial strategy. The capital programme totals 421.1 million over the next 10 years, of which 37.9 million is general fund and 383.2 million pounds relates to the HRA. Appendix A provides the capital programme by project divided into approved for spend and subject to appraisal. Key projects in this programme are also detailed in the main body of the report by council plan priority. The strategy sets out the approval process and the project programme management protocols. It also includes in the body of the report and at Appendix F several prudential indicators which are required by the SIPFA Prudential Code and the Ministry for Housing, Community and Local Government statutory investment and guidance. So that's the introduction, Leader. Happy to take questions. Scrutiny did look at this. There were a couple of questions. One of the questions was why the spending tailed off, and I think that's was answered in the fact that in most cases, we have certain approved processes that the spending will go for a few years, and others that are longer term expenditure. But clearly, we don't have idea of new capital spend perhaps in 5 years' time. That's not included in the report. And there was also a question about whether there were plans to sell council assets to fund priority investments, which Mrs. Keys answered quite strongly that, we have investment properties. They are for a return. In most cases, we are unable to buy more investment properties under the rules, and so it would be unwise in most cases, unless they're really not providing a return, to sell investment properties. So yes, the scrutiny was, other than that, they noted the report.
Thank you very much indeed. I think Councillor Lee was the only person who put his name in. You still want to go ahead with that?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. A couple of quick questions. I understand that there's a gathering with the scrutiny chair and vice chair, and you're going to be doing some granular deep dives into assets. Obviously, the council's non-housing property assets play a significant role in generating rental incomes, creating opportunities for social, economic and environmental regeneration interventions. So it's obviously quite an important area. So I guess it's just a case of reinforcing the need to have some granularity to understand how you're sweating the assets, which I think you're going to be getting to. It's manifest when you walk into the Guildhall that the repair and maintenance and the cost of running this building must be quite large. So the question I had was, does the level of income from the commercial use of the Guildhall, is it anywhere close to covering the maintenance and upkeep costs, which of course I detect the derision. So actually interesting that I was at visiting an architect at Bletchley Park, the old Wartime Code headquarters, recently, and they have chunked up that building into small office spaces and rented it out, which I thought was quite innovative. And I do remember, and I don't remember, maybe Councillor Porter remembers this, but we have a dearth of offices in central Winchester. So I did wonder whether there was a need to think more creatively in terms of how we use the Guildhall if we're worried about covering our costs. So I just throw that as an idea, and maybe that's something that can be talked about when you do your sweating the assets gathering with the chair of the scrutiny and so on. Thank you.
I would, of course, highlight that the West Wing has already been let to the School of Art, so for use of offices and lecture spaces as well. So we also have let the former police station to a fish and chip shop, so if you look at the footprint of the building in practice, there has already been quite a lot of thought over the years, but I think it's safe to say, as the Cabinet Member for Asset Management, that it does not currently wash its face, although we continue to look for innovative methods to be able to improve that situation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've got anything to add except for that actually the main part of the transfer into the property and asset reserve was in the general fund paper rather than in this one, and part of that is some of the costs that are immediate for the Guildhall that need dealing with. The property board is, and through the portfolio holder to my right here, is looking closely at the longer term use of the Guildhall. But again, of course, as with all our assets, we will have to be looked at in the context of local government reorganisation as well.
Indeed, thank you very much indeed. Any comments or questions on the paper from Cabinet colleagues? Any debate? Councillor Porter.
Thank you. I note the SIL expectation rises for 25-26. It's very encouraging to see that, and we have a very clear process for SIL applications. And I'm just going to throw out an advert there for if anybody does in any community is interested, then please start that conversation with us, because we want the whole district to benefit from SIL, and in fact, indeed it does. So I just want to raise that for anything that is within the scope of SIL for the district council. I think it's really important that we make the best use of that money. It comes in from developers for specifically to benefit infrastructure. We want to see that infrastructure built, and you can't do that unless you start the process. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cutler, any last thoughts other than agreeing with Councillor Porter on the subject of SIL?
Of course, I will always agree with Councillor Porter on SIL.
You wouldn't spend.
But I don't think I have any further to add. Leader, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to everybody who's put so much work into this paper. We have one recommendation to council, which is to approve the capital investment strategy, including the capital programme and capital programme financing, the MRP policy statement, the flexible use of capital receipt strategy, and the prudential indicators outlined in the report Appendix F, and that Cabinet directly, subject to approval, Cabinet Council approval of the capital programme, approves the following capital expenditure in 25-26. So IMT equipment and software as detailed in paragraph 11.8.6. And notes the requirement to ensure that members have the right knowledge and skills to undertake their governance role, and the ongoing support and training offered to members is continued and enhanced as required. Cabinet, do you agree those recommendations?
Agree.
Thank you very much indeed. Next item is, I must delete the paper, the Treasury Management Strategy. Deputy Leader, fire away.
The Treasury Management Strategy for 25-26 deals with the Council's investments and borrowings, and which are managed by Hampshire County Council. So this strategy covers the next 3 financial years as required under the SIPFA code. The main changes in the new Treasury strategy are that the balance sheet forecast and liability benchmark indicated the council might need to secure additional external borrowing in 25-26 to meet the full delivery of the capital programme. The Chief Finance Officer monitors the situation along with our advisors, Arling Close and Hampshire Investments and the Hampshire Investments borrowing team, and can secure additional borrowing when required. Changes also to the strategy are made to reflect the reducing cash balances that the council has and the maximum maturity date for investments. Those changes all should ensure that the council was not forced to borrow ahead of time due to its outstanding investments that we can't realise. So we ask Cabinet to note the strategy and good. I'm happy to take questions. There were very few questions at scrutiny.
Well, I think Councillor Lee, in an act of extreme enthusiasm, wants to come forward and ask questions.
Yes, obviously the significant resilience in economies of scale and working in the way we do is great. The only question I've got is, and I think Director of Finance may have answered this before, can you please reconfirm that the investments that we're using are fossil fuel free? Thank you.
I think that was answered at scrutiny as well, that there are no equity investments anyway. So there's no direct investments. And the strategies, I mean, one of the questions in scrutiny was how it's separated from other pooled money by Hampshire County Council, but each area that they manage is separated, and our policy does not include investment, or includes not investing in fossil fuels. So therefore it is kept ring fenced in that respect.
Thank you very much indeed. Any comments or questions from Cabinet?
Yes, I just wanted to know, are the SIL funds included in that figure, and how do we manage that as the years go on?
We've had this question about specific reserves and specific elements of things, and I think it's quite difficult to explain. But clearly, we have reserves, and a lot of those reserves are borrowed internally for use for other purposes when we can make internal borrowing rather than external borrowing. And the strategy, the Treasury management strategy, is just very important to keep enough of that money fluid so that we can work day to day, but also it's safe and also makes some return. So something like the SIL fund isn't just held in a bank somewhere and invested. It's used while it's waiting, and so part of the key part of the Treasury management strategy is actually understanding where the calls on that money is. So if we start spending some of the reserves, we may have to borrow for some of the things that have had internal borrowing before, and that's the movement. But those things aren't separated out. It's like the net amount of money that we have that's not being borrowed internally, and how we use that is what the Treasury management strategy is about. And it's one of those things that I don't think is widely understood, but I just tried. I've been thinking the last week about how one simply explains it, but it's because there was a question earlier about where the interest on the SIL money goes. Well, in fact, it is retained inside the business like the interest on any of the other reserves. In some cases where it's internal borrowing, it's saving us the interest of external borrowing, and so it's not realised as such. And within the Treasury management strategy, there are some things that have reasonable returns, but it's all about how liquid the funds need to be. So very little is held on longer term investments, simply because you need to have that fluidity So it's just getting that explanation out is quite difficult sometimes.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions? Debate? Final thoughts?
Well, my final thoughts is we have a robust treasury management strategy. I think only twice in the last 5 years has it been deviated from accidentally by the Hampshire borrowing team in very minor ways. They're very quick to report it to us. It's not had any material effect on anything we've done. The Chief Financial Officer works with that team and with our advisors, Arling Close, so it's continually monitored and keeps our money safe. I think that's key aspect to the strategy.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, and indeed, as somebody who had a bit of fun at another party's expense when some of our money wasn't kept safe in the past, it is reassuring to see that everything is in good hands. We have 3 recommendations in front of us. That we will be recommending to Council that the Treasury Management Strategy Statement, which includes the annual Treasury investment strategy for 25-26, is approved. The authority is delegated to the Section 151 officer to manage the Council's pooled property investment long-term borrowing according to the Treasury Management Strategy Statement as appropriate. And that authority is delegated to the Section 151 officer, who in turn discharges this function to Hampshire County Council's Director of Corporate Operations, as agreed in the service level agreement, to manage all council investments other than the high legal portfolio and short-term borrowing according to Treasury Management Statement as appropriate. Cabinet, are you happy to agree that?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Last item of business is to note the future items for consideration by Cabinet as shown on the March 2025 forward plan. Are you happy to note that? And on that note, with that, I think we've reached the end of the agenda. Thank you everybody for their time. Thank you to officers for all the work that went into preparing these papers. Thank you to the members of the public and the councillors that came along to express their views. And thank you to Oliver Cromwell for not flattening the city. And on that note, I declare the meeting closed.